Chapter 766. As soon as this frightening thought flashed through her mind, she subconsciously closed her eyes. Li Yundong's palm had already slapped the top of her head, and the index finger of his right hand was also chiseled into the shunting acupoint on her forehead. At that moment, Chris felt her body tremble as a majestic force poured into her from the top of her head like a flood. This power was as hot as lava, dripping down from the top of her head as if she had been enlightened. It quickly poured into her limbs, hair, and then gathered in her internal organs. At this time, Li Yundong's right hand pinched the Mahamudra of eliminating obstacles on the top of the Buddha, and his fingers dug into her forehead. Suddenly, it seemed as if a hole had been dug into the top of her head, and the heat in her internal organs began to boil. Chris only felt that her internal organs were like a boiling boiler, and the heat was constantly burning and rolling in her chest and abdomen. This heat was like a whirlpool gathering in the lower dantian of her lower abdomen, gathering more and more, like a constantly burning fireball. The heat from this fireball was constantly rushing up and out of her shunting acupoint. Although Chris could clearly feel the abnormality in her body, it didn't make her feel any pain. It was as if she was in a sauna. Amidst the slight stab of pain, there was a feeling of contentment and contentment. Chris only felt that her body was becoming lighter and lighter, as if her whole body was about to float. Before long, she opened her eyes and was shocked. She saw that she was floating in the air, and there was a blonde woman with blue eyes standing at her feet with her eyes closed. It was her body. Chris's eyes widened and she looked at her body in mid-air in disbelief. She stammered, Am I dead? Ling Yu, who was standing to one side, burst out laughing. She looked at Chris with some envy and said, Don't be silly. Now your Yin spirit is out of your body. She pouted, and the corners of her eyes were a little unhappy. She thought to herself, Leader is so biased. Why didn't he help me? Chris didn't know what was happening in front of her, but Ling Yu knew it very well. Although Chris's body was reconstructed by a panacea, she had yet to reach the foundation establishment realm, nor had she formally cultivated. Thus, it was naturally impossible for her to have a Yin spirit, and it was naturally impossible for her Yin spirit to leave her body. However, at this time, Li Yundong was temporarily helping Chris condense the Niden in her lower abdomen. Then, through the Niden in her lower abdomen, he forcefully pulled her Yin spirit out of her body. Flying with the Yang spirit or the Yin spirit consumed much less Jinqi than flying with the body. Chris flew with Li Yundong in the body of the Yin spirit. She didn't need to consume any Jinqi, and she wouldn't be a burden to Li Yundong. Naturally, there wouldn't be the embarrassing situation of being knocked to the ground by the other party after running for thousands of miles. Although this method was a bit like spoiling things through excessive enthusiasm and was extremely risky, it was a last resort right now. Moreover, Chris would definitely benefit greatly in the future. Chris looked down at herself, her face full of shock and confusion. My Yin spirit has left my body? Does it mean his soul left his body? Li Yundong nodded at her. Something like that. Come on, let's talk on the way. After that, he also instantly left his body with the Yang spirit. With the 7 treasure purse that he carried with him, he grabbed Chris's Yin spirit and flew out. Although the Yin spirit was invisible and intangible, when Li Yundong grabbed Chris's wrist, it was as if he had grabbed it. Chris saw a layer of faint golden light flowing on her wrist. She was effortlessly pulled by Li Yundong to fly at a high speed, but she could no longer feel the strong wind blowing in her ears. Chris felt like she was hanging in a small carriage behind a high-speed train. She didn't need to expend any energy to be carried by Li Yundong at a high speed. Out of curiosity, she reached out her hand to touch the place on her wrist where the golden light was flowing, only to find that the place she touched felt solid. When she touched other parts of her body, she suddenly felt empty air, as if she was just a cloud of mist. Chris couldn't help but say in surprise, It's amazing. Can the soul really go out of the body? As Li Yundong flew with her, he explained to her, the soul is just a general term. The Yang spirit and the Yin spirit can all be called souls. Before anyone cultivates, if there is a situation where the soul goes out of the body, it will be the Yin spirit without exception. It is invisible and intangible, and it can't touch anything. But if you know how to cultivate, build the Xueqi phase and cultivate the Yang spirit, it means that you have transcended this body that will die of old age. From then on, you will have one more life than ordinary people. As long as your Yang spirit is not destroyed, you will never die. Chris's eyes widened when she heard this. She listened to every word Li Yundong said eagerly. After he finished, she asked again, But I heard that if the soul is out of the body for too long, will something happen? Li Yundong nodded at her and motioned for her to be at ease. He said, if you rely on your current strength to get out of your body, if you leave your body for too long or too far, your soul will lose connection with your body. Even if your soul returns in the future, your body will have decayed. You told me before that your grandmother was affected by the soul detachment technique. Your grandma still left a part of her soul in her body. Her 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls haven't left her body. The part she left is in charge of the body's metabolism, so that when your soul comes back one day, you won't find that your body is no longer usable. Hearing this, Chris felt a little relieved, but she still asked with some worry, but I haven't built the Xueqi phase yet. Will it be okay for my Yin spirit to leave so far away? Chris's worry was reasonable. At this time, Li Yundong smiled slightly and said lightly, don't worry, as long as I am here, as long as you are not 3 meters away from me, you can go anywhere in the world. There was a well-known saying in the cultivation world, which was, solitary yin does not grow, and solitary yang does not grow. Although this sentence came from Chang Yunqing's Qianglin, a writer of the Qing dynasty, this truth had long been recorded in many cultivation books. If Chris's yin spirit left her body without Li Yundong's help, she would not be able to hold on even if she flew dozens of miles, let alone tens of thousands of miles. Her yin spirit would even break on the spot, and she would not be able to control her soul and be torn apart. This was the truth that solitary yin did not grow. At this time, with the help of Li Yundong's powerful Yuanyang genuine qi, her yin spirit condensed within 3 meters of Li Yundong. She did not have to worry about it collapsing because of her low cultivation. Although Li Yundong's words sounded calm, Chris still sensed an extremely confident and conceited arrogance in his tone, as if he was looking down on the world and no one could compete with him. A confident man could exude a strange aura. Chris felt a strong sense of security from Li Yundong's words. She immediately felt completely relieved and did not say anything more. The 2 of them flew all the way. The speed of the yang spirit was far faster than that of the physical body. A few hours later, they had already flown to the other side of the Pacific Ocean. At this time, it was already 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, when the sky was darkest. Chris looked up at the stars in the sky. After identifying the direction, she pointed with her finger and Li Yundong flew over with her. Seeing that there were more and more buildings around them, Li Yundong landed with Chris. At this time, they had already entered the suburbs on the edge of Harrisburg. At this time, Chris looked around, pondered for a moment, and said, find my house first, and then I'll know how to go. Li Yundong nodded and quickly flew to her home in the direction Chris had pointed out. At this time, the banquet at Chris's home had already ended. Although she had left without saying goodbye, the guests still had a good time. Many people were sleeping in the living room. Chris only glanced at her home before turning her gaze elsewhere, searching for the path she had taken to get here. She quickly pointed and said, it's here. Li Yundong nodded and once again flew quickly with her. The 2 of them flew for a long time, but they did not see a single figure. Chris couldn't help but feel anxious. Why didn't I see them? Could it be that they were no longer here? Harrisburg, as the capital of a state, had less than 50,000 people. Compared with the provincial capitals of China, it was incredible. One could imagine how sparsely populated it was. Especially in the suburbs, it was normal to walk for more than 10 miles without seeing a single person. At this time, it was late at night, and it was difficult to see clearly. Even if she took a wrong step at the beginning, she would be wrong for more than 10 miles. What's more, she didn't know whether Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and the others had left or where they were. The more Chris thought about it, the more flustered she became, and for a moment, her face became extremely ugly. Li Yundong was angry at first, but at this time, he calmed down. He simply pulled Chris to stand in the wilderness and said, don't worry, I'll look around. As he said this, he closed his eyes, and in an instant, his body rose into the air, turning into countless golden lights and scattering in all directions. It was one of the 8 great magical powers of the 8 great freedoms of the Buddhist Dharma, which could allow thousands of incarnations. When Chris saw that the golden light was as dazzling as fireworks, she was stunned and speechless. She stayed where she was and didn't dare to move, for fear that Li Yundong would never return and she would become a lonely ghost. Eventually, her soul would dissipate between heaven and earth. Fortunately, Li Yundong had only left for a few seconds before the golden light gathered back. Li Yundong's figure appeared, took Chris's hand, and flew in the east direction. Let's go, I found it. Chris was pulled by him and flew about 2 or 3 miles away. Suddenly, she saw a fog in front of her, covering the surrounding wasteland with a radius of hundreds of meters. A bright moon as big as a silver plate was hanging high in the sky. This fog seemed to separate the outside world from the inside, making people feel like they were separated by yin and yang. It was extremely strange. At this time, Li Yundong's face was as cold as water. He turned to Chris and said, "Stand 3 meters behind me. No matter what happens, don't move. Do you understand?" Chris knew that an earth-shattering battle was about to break out. How could she dare to say no? She quickly nodded like a chicken pecking rice. Li Yundong was relieved and turned his head to look at the fog. He smiled coldly and thought to himself, Su Ling, I almost died in your hands in the Battle of Carry Holy Mountain, and I almost died in your hands in Tiandu Peak. Now, the tables have turned. It's okay if you provoke me, but how dare you bully Su Chan and Zi Yuan? While Li Yundong was thinking about it, his heart skipped a beat. He remembered that Chris had once told him that Su Chan had used an illusion maze to trap Su Ling and Su Kong in it. At this time, they must not have broken out. Why not make good preparations before they break out? Thinking of this, Li Yundong sneered and whispered sarcastically, "If I don't entertain you warmly, how can I be worthy of our meeting?" Chapter 767. Chris opened her blue eyes and looked at the thick white fog in front of her in surprise and doubt. In the white fog, she seemed to be able to see figures flashing in it, but she couldn't hear any sound coming from it. Moreover, the white fog was constantly changing around her, sometimes condensing into a pattern of mountains and rivers, and sometimes changing into a magnificent scene of the sea and the sky. It was really amazing. She looked at Li Yundong, who was silently pinching his fingers, and suddenly asked boldly, "Master, didn't you tell Su Chan and Zi Yuan that you were here?" Li Yundong didn't even turn his head. While concentrating on mobilizing his Xueqi, he said slowly, "It's useless. This illusion can separate the real world and the virtual world. People outside can't hear the people inside, and the people inside can't hear the people outside." Chris was surprised. From time to time, she looked at the changing white fog in front of her, and then at Li Yundong's hands. She saw that at this time, Li Yundong's hands were quickly pinching the Mahamudra. Every time he pinched a handprint, he would pat in front of him, and suddenly a golden handprint appeared. This handprint seemed to be real and floated in the air. After a long time, it slowly turned into a ray of golden light and scattered around. The speed at which Li Yundong was pinching the Mahamudra with both hands was far faster than the speed at which the Mahamudra dissipated, so in a short time, there were all kinds of Mahamudra in front of Li Yundong. Although Chris didn't recognize these handprints, she saw that there seemed to be a golden wall of Mahamudra in front of Li Yundong. It was like a Buddha wall in the world, majestic and awe-inspiring, which made people feel awe at first glance. The Buddha wall shone with golden light and shone on Li Yundong, making him look like he was covered with a layer of golden sand. He was like the fighting Vajra in Buddhist legends, the supreme Arhat. Chris was in awe. If she hadn't been shocked by the scene in front of her and couldn't move, she would have knelt down and worshipped such a vision. After Li Yundong finished the last Mahamudra, he suddenly exhaled and shouted. Immediately, the Mahamudra wall in front of him shattered into countless golden lights and spread in all directions. Some of the golden lights surrounded the white fog, while others kept penetrating and spreading inside. During the Jin dynasty, Wang Ji went into the mountains to chop firewood and accidentally saw 2 old men playing chess. He watched the game curiously from the side. After watching the game, the handle of the axe he carried with him had already rotted away. There was no sun or moon in the mountains, and no year was known in the heat and cold. In the eyes of the mortal world, this must be some sort of celestial magic from the heavens. One day in the heavens was equivalent to 100 years on earth. In reality, however, in the world of cultivation, this was actually a large-scale illusory spell formation. The prison in the painting ground, used by Su Chan, was such a powerful illusory magic formation. However, any magic was different because of the caster. Wang Ji had encountered a figure at the level of Almighty Immortal. His body and soul were shrouded in the illusory magic formation, and he was dominated and affected by the power of magic. His whole body's senses were affected by magic, so his body did not decay and his soul did not disperse after hundreds of years. The monk guarding the mountain of Zhenyan Tantrism had once confused Zhou Qin with illusory magic, making her almost unable to extricate herself. Abe Yoli of the Yinyang Dao had also used illusory magic on Lu Chunping, controlling his body and divine senses, almost turning him into a demon. Top masters like Li Yundong and Zi Yuan had also been trapped in the illusory magic formation of Prison in the Painting Ground by Lu Yi. They thought that they had broken through the surroundings, but in fact, they had not moved at all. Even masters like them had been tricked, which showed how powerful the illusory magic formation was. However, illusory magic was, after all, an illusory magic. In the eyes of the righteous sects such as Zhengyi school, it was an inferior magic. Therefore, only a small number of cultivation sects in the world would practice such magic. Among these sects, the Fox Zen school was a grandmaster sect that used illusory magic. In the past, no sect dared to say that they could surpass the Fox Zen school in terms of illusory magic and bewildering magic. However, after thousands of years of inheritance, the Fox Zen school had declined. In Lu Ye's generation, except for him, the others were all half-baked. Only Ao Wushuang could be regarded as proficient in illusory magic. Although she had taught this illusory magic to Su Chan was a playful person and was not willing to work hard to learn it. In addition, her cultivation was low, so Ao Wushuang did not force her to learn the powerful prison in the painting ground. She just made her memorize the incantation, finger incantation, and heart incantation. Naturally, it was impossible for Su Chan to trap the opponent in the magic formation like Lu Yi and escape. It was even more impossible for her to cover the opponent's body with her spiritual energy for hundreds of years like the Jingxian master Wang Zhi had met. Although the caster was almost invincible in the illusory magic formation and could trap the opponent with continuous illusions, or directly cause the opponent to collapse or even die with illusory magic, it was already very difficult for her to trap a master at the Jinshin level for 48 hours. Su Chan had only learned this magic for a few days. It was a compliment to say that she was half-baked. At this time, she had used this magic with all her might. The best result was that she and Zi Yuan would be trapped in it together. Everyone would enter the formation together, and no one would be able to come out. Therefore, they and Su Lingxiu were trapped in it, and no one knew that Li Yunyang had come out of the formation. Li Yunyang knew that Su Chan was supporting the magic formation with her own spiritual energy. Once her spiritual energy was exhausted, the magic formation would automatically become invalid. If she wanted to hold on, she would overdraw her essence, qi, and blood. In other words, she would overdraw her yuan-qi and life. This kind of situation was naturally not what Li Yunyang wanted. Moreover, based on his understanding of Su Chan, the little girl didn't know if he could arrive in time, so she would definitely continue to waste time until she died. Therefore, Li Yunyang had already made two preparations. Once the other party broke out of the formation, he would give a fierce blow to Su Lingxiu and Su Lingxiu, who were unaware of it. At the same time, he was prepared to break the formation by force, in case Su Chan's bitter struggle caused irreversible damage to himself. After Li Yunyang shattered the golden Buddha wall in front of him with one palm, he slowly pinched a Vairocana Dharma boundary seal. His whole body slowly floated up, rising higher and higher. He looked down at all living beings from above. At this time, Chris was wrapped in Li Yunyang's spiritual energy, and her Yin spirit was also slowly flying up, still landing about 3 meters behind him. Chris saw that Su Chan had always pinched her fingers when she was casting spells, and Li Yunyang had mostly pinched his fingers when he was fighting. She was so curious that she couldn't help asking, "Master, why do you all pinch your fingers? Can it provide a mysterious power?" Li Yundong didn't even turn his head. He lowered his head and stared at his feet, saying, "The Fox Zen school was founded by the Rock Fox, who studied under Zen Master Baizhang in the middle of the Tang dynasty. At that time, Zen Master Baizhang was influenced by the 3 secrets in one, so the Rock Fox naturally learned from him and passed it down from generation to generation." Chris listened attentively and suddenly asked, "What is the 3 secrets in one? Then why do you pinch it too?" Li Yundong said, "Although Zen Master Baizhang practiced the Mahayana sect, which is the Buddhism of the Central Plains, the Tang secret was prevalent at that time, and the 3 secrets in one advocated by the Tang secret was accepted by the Mahayana sect and the Taoist cultivation sects at the same time. The so-called 3 secrets in one are the heart secret, the mouth secret, and the finger secret. The heart secret refers to the power generated by visualizing gods and Buddhas in your heart. The mouth secret refers to the power generated by chanting secret mantras in your mouth, and the finger secret refers to the power generated by pinching the Mahamudra with your fingers. When these 3 forces are combined, they can produce great power. At that time, Many cultivators of the Mahayana sect in Taoism very much agreed with the concept of the three secrets in one, so they applied it to magic. You can see that almost every time we Chinese cultivators use magic, we will pinch our fingers, chant the mantras, and visualize gods in our hearts. Chris seemed to have understood something. She was about to ask again when she suddenly heard a loud bang coming from below. A few beams of golden light pierced through the white mist and pointed straight to the sky. Then, an extremely arrogant voice came from the white mist. "Ha ha ha, what kind of shitty maze is this? You're just trying to show off in front of an expert. You were still broken by me." As he spoke, the white mist gradually dissipated, revealing the figures of Su Lingxiu, Su Chan, and Zi Yuan. Su Chan's face was pale and her breathing was rapid. If it weren't for Zi Yuan's support, she would have fallen to the ground. Obviously, this magic formation had consumed all her spiritual energy and Xueqi. Zi Yuan stared at Su Ling nervously. She slowly took a breath, but the Xueqi in her body was surging quietly. At this time, she didn't know that Li Yunyang had arrived. All her attention was on Su Ling, and she would fight him to the death in a moment. Su Ling's cultivation was far above Su Chan's. He could only be trapped by her for a while, but he would definitely not be trapped by her forever. Su Chan had trapped Su Ling with her weak strength, just like a child locking an adult. Although she had pinched his vital points at the beginning, the difference in strength between the two was too great. After a stalemate, the adult would eventually be able to break free with his own strength. At this time, Su Ling had broken the illusion magic formation and thought that the other party had no more tricks. He said proudly, "Well, what other tricks do you have? Just use them. I'll take them all." But he looked over and saw that although Su Chan's spiritual energy had been overdrawn, her pale face had become even whiter. At this time, she was leaning against Zi Yuan like a weak willow in the wind, delicate and pitiful. It was really pitiful. Although Zi Yuan was in danger, she did not panic at all. She had the appearance of a fairy and the bearing of an immortal. Although Su Ling was not lecherous, when he saw the two beautiful women standing side by side at this time, his heart skipped a beat. He said proudly and arrogantly, "If you two are willing to kneel down and kowtow to me twice, I will spare your lives. In the future, you will follow me and serve me well. Maybe I will teach you good kung fu. What do you think?" When Zi Yuan and Su Chan heard this, they were both furious. Just as they were about to curse, they suddenly heard a cold snort in the air. This cold snort was extremely ordinary in the ears of others, but in the ears of Su Chan and Zi Yuan, it was like a clap of thunder. The two of them felt that this voice was extremely familiar. It was clearly Li Yundong's voice. They looked up in ecstasy and saw Li Yunyang looking down at them from a height of more than 10 meters above their heads. Zi Yuan and Su Chan immediately felt relieved. They knew that since Li Yunyang had arrived, they would be free of worry and no longer be in danger. At this time, when Su Ling suddenly heard this voice, he was shocked. With his cultivation quotient, he hadn't noticed that there was a person above his head at all. This was simply incredible. He looked up and saw Li Yunyang at a glance. He suddenly became angry. He raised his head, pointed at him and shouted, "It's you again, you little bastard. Well, last time I let you take advantage of me in the Battle of Tiandu Peak. This time I must." Before he could finish his words, Li Yunyang had already slapped down angrily. How dare he say this to Su Chan and Zi Yuan? "You're courting death." Li Yunyang attacked angrily. He had been prepared for this. At this time, he struck out with his palm. Suddenly, the golden light hidden around him condensed in an instant and gathered crazily in front of Li Yunyang, forming a golden Mahamudra Buddha wall. Then, one Mahamudra after another, bombarded Su Ling like a storm. Chris, who was behind Li Yunyang, only felt that this wall-like Mahamudra was falling down like a rocket launcher. In an instant, Su Ling and Su Kong were all shrouded in it. With a rumbling sound, Li Yunyang's hundreds of Mahamudra, with the power of 3 secrets in one, rushed out like a flood. The position where Su Ling and Su Kong were standing seemed to have been bombarded by a cannon. In an instant, their figures were swallowed up and disappeared. Chapter 768. When Li Yundong had fought with Su Ling, he had still been at the top level of the Yang spirit. At this time, he had already cultivated to the top level of the Jinshin. Although there was only one level difference between their realms, their strength was incomparable. Su Ling had thought that Li Yundong was still the ignorant man from Tiandu Peak. Caught off guard, he naturally suffered a great loss. His current strength was weaker than Li Yundong's, and he had been careless and miscalculated. How could he not suffer a great loss? When he suddenly saw the Mahamudra smashing toward him like a storm, his heart suddenly trembled, and a trace of despair flashed in his eyes. Li Yundong's Mahamudra Kung Fu was extremely powerful. Often, a Mahamudra had the power to shake heaven and earth. At this time, hundreds of them had gathered and slapped down one after another. The power could be imagined. At this moment, Su Ling's mind went blank, and he thought to himself, "My life is over." But at this time, the blind man beside him roared. He suddenly rose up and jumped toward Li Yundong's Mahamudra. Su Kong knew that he was disabled. At this time, Li Yundong had struck out so many Mahamudra with thunderous momentum. His Xixiang might be able to escape, but he would definitely die. Once he was hit by a palm, although he would not die immediately, it would be impossible for him to escape the other Mahamudra that followed like a storm. And with the friendship between him and his Xixiang, he knew that his Xixiang would definitely not let him be killed by the Mahamudra. He would definitely do his best to save him. At that time, he would become a burden to his Xixiang. Therefore, Su Kong knew that he would definitely die, so he immediately used the most ferocious and terrifying move of Zenkingism: 10,000 Paths Destruction. Although cultivators cherished their bodies and lives, it was inevitable that they would encounter powerful opponents who made them desperate. Once their young spirit was captured by their opponents, or their bodies were occupied and refined by them, it would be a fate worse than death. Therefore, some fierce cultivators created their own moves to perish together with strong enemies. This kind of move was different in each sect, but the principle was mostly the same, and it was very simple. Cultivators could control their pores at will. Once they closed all their pores, they would become a completely leakless cauldron, just like a pressure cooker without air holes. At this time, they were frantically circulating their essence, qi and blood, constantly producing true essence. This caused the qi in the pressure cooker to become more and more intense, until the cauldron could no longer withstand it and finally exploded. This principle was similar to the explosion of a gas tank, a pressure cooker, and a grenade. Cultivators could use themselves as a medium to generate a huge explosive force. They could instantly release several times their own strength in order to perish together with the enemy. Just from the name, one could tell how ferocious Su Ling's move was. If he used this move with the power of Jinshin or Thunder Retribution, it would really form a terrible scene of 10,000 Paths Destruction. Su Ling jumped into the air, and his body grew larger and larger as he flew, like a balloon that was constantly expanding. When he touched Li Yundong's Mahamudra, his body exploded in an instant and turned into a cloud of blood mist in an instant. Boom! There was a loud noise. This burst of explosion immediately stopped Li Yundong's Mahamudra. The Mahamudra, which had been moving like thunder, obviously paused for a moment when it was about to hit Su Ling. However, in less than a second, Su Ling had completely reacted. Although his cultivation was not as good as Li Yundong's, at this time, he saw that in order to save him, his Shidi had actually used a skill to perish together with him. Unfortunately, his cultivation quotient was too far away from Li Yundong's, so he could only block the Mahamudra a little. He couldn't even shake it away, but could only block its momentum a little. Su Ling watched his Shidi die tragically in front of him. In an instant, his pupils shrank to the size of needles, and he let out a beast-like roar. Su Ling knew that his Shidi was completely dead. His body and soul had been destroyed. He was so angry that he wanted to tear Li Yundong into pieces, but he knew that even if he wanted to take revenge, he had to survive first. If he wanted to survive, he had to survive this storm-like bombardment. Su Ling gritted his teeth, and the power of Jinshin suddenly came out, forming a golden barrier in front of his head, and forcibly withstood the overwhelming golden Mahamudra. At this time, both Chris, who was next to Li Yundong, and Su Chan and Zi Yuan, who were more than 10 meters away from Su Ling, saw the golden Mahamudra sweep over in an instant like a stormy sea and swallow Su Ling whole. At first, the rumbling sound of the golden Mahamudra hitting Su Ling's body was a little scattered, like a person swinging a hammer repeatedly with both hands. But soon, the sound became one, rising and falling. Gradually, the sound became more and more dense, deafening and creepy. Su Chan and Zi Yuan knew that with Li Yundong's exquisite control, he would definitely not let the Mahamudra affect them. But just hearing the dense sound made their hair stand on end and their hearts tremble. Chris subconsciously covered her ears with her hands, as if the sound would shatter her non-existent eardrums. If she hadn't been by Li Yundong's side at this time and protected by his Yuanyang Qi, she was afraid that the shockwave caused by the Mahamudra would have shattered her own spirit. The three of them didn't know how long it had been, but when Li Yundong's Mahamudra finally stopped bombarding, the world returned to peace. Chris looked down from above and saw that Su Ling had disappeared. There was only a deep pit about 3 meters in diameter, as if Su Ling had been blown into powder. As soon as Chris let out a cheer, she saw a figure suddenly fly out of the deep pit like a cannonball and rush toward Li Yundong like a bolt of lightning. Li Yunyang's heart skipped a beat. He immediately understood that after Su Ling had resisted a few Mahamudra, he must have transferred the force to the ground, causing him to be slammed into the ground like a nail. Although this seemed to be a great loss of face, it had saved Su Ling's life. Otherwise, if he had stood upright and taken it head-on, he would have definitely been blown into powder. Li Yundong saw Su Ling pouncing on him like a mad tiger, and his momentum was like a rainbow, as if he wanted to die with him. He smiled coldly and slapped down, meeting Su Ling's palm head-on. With a loud bang, this head-on collision immediately sent Su Ling flying back and smashing into the ground like a meteorite, causing countless dust to splash up. When the smoke and dust dissipated, Su Ling staggered up from the ground. His hair was disheveled and his face was covered in blood. He gritted his teeth and said, "Little bastard, I'm going to kill you. I must kill you. Give me back my shitty's life." Fighting was one of the cruelest and most dangerous things in the world. Once you met a deadly enemy and lost, you would be doomed eternally. Su Ling roared like a wild beast in grief and anger. His eyes became redder and redder, and the golden light all over his body became brighter and brighter. His body slowly grew larger and larger. Li Yundong suddenly noticed that Su Ling's zhenqi was growing at an astonishing rate. His heart suddenly trembled. He lowered his head and shouted at Zi Yuan and Su Chan, "Come to me quickly." Without thinking, Zi Yuan immediately pulled Su Chan and flew to Li Yundong's side. Li Yundong pinched his fingers together, activated his zhenqi, and quickly shot out the immovable fundamental seal and the Amitabha fundamental seal. These golden Mahamudra were slapped in the air by Li Yundong, like relief sculptures, condensed and not scattered. They quickly formed a huge golden ball, tightly wrapping Li Yundong, Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Chris. Su Ling's move of 10,000 paths and people vanish couldn't cause any damage to Li Yundong at all. However, when Su Ling used the power of Jinshin to make this move, its power was incomparable. Even if it was the primary level of Jinshin, once its power was increased several times, what would it be like? Li Yundong didn't dare to be careless, especially with Su Chan and Zi Yuan by his side. He would rather be injured than see them hurt, so he used all his strength at this time. At this time, looking from a distance, Li Yundong and the others could no longer be seen. Only a huge golden ball was floating in the air, like a golden moon. At this time, Su Ling's body swelled up, and his whole body was like a huge balloon. He laughed wildly and roared, "Little bastard, I must kill you. Just wait and see." Li Yundong heard his clamor and was very vigilant at first, but the more he listened, the more he felt that something was wrong. At this time, Zi Yuan suddenly said, "Oh no, he's going to escape." As soon as Zi Yuan's voice fell, Su Ling's body exploded with a bang. It was as if a giant bomb had exploded onto the ground, and countless dazzling golden lights quickly fled in all directions. At this time, Li Yundong had set up a heavy defense to block Su Ling's move of 10,000 paths and people vanish, but he had never expected that Su Ling had just used an incomplete version of 10,000 paths and people vanish at the cost of his own body cauldron, making Li Yundong mistakenly think that he was going to die with him. However, he had taken advantage of the power of the explosion of his body cauldron to quickly escape with his young spirit. Li Yundong wanted to chase after him, but at this time, he was trapped in the golden light handprint formation he had set up. It was too late for him to catch up. Even if he wanted to take out the burning thumb pot again, it was too late. Damn it, I still let him escape. Li Yundong gritted his teeth and cursed, but deep in his heart, he was also shocked by Su Ling's decisive courage. He thought to himself, "This guy will definitely be a big scourge in the future. If I meet him again next time, I must not let him escape again. Otherwise, there will be endless troubles in the future." Li Yundong's eyes flickered, and he slowly descended from the air with Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Chris. He nodded to Su Chan and Zi Yuan with a smile and said, "Are you two all right?" Su Chan wrapped her arms around Li Yundong's waist and greedily sniffed his strong masculine scent. She closed her eyes tiredly and murmured, "I'm fine. I'm so tired. Yundong, let me sleep for a while." Li Yundong stroked her head lovingly, then turned to Zi Yuan and nodded. "Let's go somewhere else to talk." Zi Yuan nodded, and the four of them quickly rose into the air and flew in the direction of Chris's house. At this time, because of the explosion caused by Su Ling's self-destruction, the ground, which had been stained black by the 5 ghosts and 5 plagues magic, seemed to have been plowed. The soil underneath was turned over again, and the ground was a mess. After an unknown period of time, a roaring police car drove over on the asphalt road not far from this land. A police officer got out of the car. He looked around, held a walkie-talkie in one hand, and said, "Call the front desk. I have arrived at the location mentioned by the reporter. Over." After a while, a voice came from the walkie-talkie. "The front desk has received the report. Did you see a round object of light in the air at the scene?" It turned out that when Li Yundong had been fighting with Su Ling, Su Kong, and the others, the noise had been too big. Although this place was sparsely populated and there were few residents nearby, it did not mean that there were no residents. Especially at the last moment, Li Yundong had protected himself with the flawless circular golden light palm print formation. His whole body was like a huge golden ball, shining with dazzling light. The explosion of the battle between Li Yundong and Su Ling might not have been able to spread more than 10 miles away, but the light of this huge golden ball of light could. The American police system was extremely fast, and they liked to call the police at the slightest sign of trouble. Therefore, as soon as they received the news, the police immediately drove to the scene. The police officer looked around with a flashlight in his other hand, coughed dryly into the walkie-talkie, and said, "Front desk, my place is as messy as a pile of dog shit. There's a deep pit on the ground. I think there's been a war here. Over." "Soon," the front desk replied. "Damn it, don't care about that damn pit and dog shit. Someone called the police and said that they saw a golden round UFO there. Answer me, what the hell is that? Over." The police officer looked up at the sky carefully. After a while, he said seriously, "Call the front desk. I did see a golden round thing. Over." The front desk was also quite surprised. "Damn it, there really is one? What is that? Is it UFO? Over." The police officer looked up at the full moon in the sky and said in a strange tone, "That's a moonj. Over." Chapter 769. Li Yundong had forced Xueqi to self-destruct with the force of a thunderbolt, and Su Ling had destroyed his own body. The Jin Xinyang spirit had turned into countless clones and fled in all directions. He couldn't catch up with them, so he could only take Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Chris back to Chris' home first. When they were about to reach Chris' house, Zi Yuan suddenly remembered something and said to Li Yundong, "By the way, Li Yundong, my powerful magical weapon is still in Han Zhen's house by Yuhuang Xiandu. Now I can't feel the aura of this powerful magical weapon. I think Su Ling didn't have time to take Yuhuang Xiandu with him when he escaped." Li Yundong was carrying the unconscious Su Chan on his back. He thought to himself, "I've seen the power of this powerful magical weapon. In a one-on-one fight, the power of this powerful magical weapon is too heaven-defying. It doesn't have any attack power, but it can be used to exchange for any powerful magical weapon of the opponent. If used properly, it can completely change the situation and change the situation of the battle. It can be said that with this powerful magical weapon, there are no cultivators in the world who can use powerful magical weapons to suppress me." Li Yundong nodded slightly and said, "Then we can't let this powerful magical weapon fall into the hands of others. I just don't know where the powerful magical weapon of the 5 ghosts and 5 plagues has gone. Has it been taken away by Su Ling?" Zi Yuan thought for a moment and said, "I didn't see Su Ling use the 5 ghosts and 5 plagues magic treasure when I broke out of the prison in the painting illusory maze. He must have put it away in the magic formation. Maybe he took it with him, or maybe it was smashed into powder by your golden light handprint formation." Li Yundong himself was at the top of the Jinshin phase. More than 100 Mahamudra had smashed down before, and even steel had been smashed into slag, let alone a jade powerful magical weapon. Li Yundong sighed softly and said, "I hope that such a vicious powerful magical weapon will no longer be left in the world to harm people." The two of them whispered and, under the guidance of Chris, once again came to Han Zhen's house. Although the two powerful enemies, Su Ling and Su, had been defeated, Zi Yuan and Chris were really worried about whether there was anyone else behind Han Zhen. The two of them hesitated at the door, but Li Yundong, who was skilled and bold, went straight in. As soon as he entered the door, he saw that there was no one upstairs and downstairs, and the surroundings seemed a little messy. Zi Yuan looked around and found that Han Zhen had obviously come back before. He had taken some things and fled in a hurry. He couldn't take the two powerful magical weapons in the living room with him, so he had to let them stay. At this time, the Yuhuang Xiandu was floating in the air. Although the 9-ling Xiandu was purple, but there was a 5-colored light flowing on the edge of the powerful magical weapon. Although it was of the color it, of the ling it of the Xian Yundong it of the ling of Tiana Fairy it and Yundong. The Yuhuang immortal capital, on the other hand, stood motionless in the same place, like an ancient minister holding a jade tablet and standing quietly in the court. At this time, Zi Yuan also knew that the Yuhuang Xiandu had fallen into Li Yundong's hands. She no longer had to worry about a powerful magical weapon in the world that could completely restrain her. Her heart gradually relaxed and she smiled. This powerful magical weapon is said to be a powerful magical weapon refined by Zhang Jihe, and this Zhenren Zuanzenzi can write an idyllic poem like The Fisherman's Song. He must be very open-minded and understanding. I didn't expect that he would refine such an overbearing and rigid powerful magical weapon. After Li Yunyang gently put Su Chan on the sand, he stretched out his hand and generously grabbed Yuhuang Xiandu, saying, "In front of Mount Shisai, egrets fly, peach blossoms flow, mandarin fish are fat. Green bamboo hat, green straw raincoat, no need to return in the slanting wind and fine rain." Standing on the land of the United States, Li Yundong had just beaten Su Ling and Su Kong. At this time, he had taken over the Yuhuang Xiandu, reciting Zhang Jihe's The Fisherman's Song, while activating his zhenqi to subdue Yuhuang Xiandu. The scene was really weird. However, Zi Yuan and Chris were used to it and didn't feel anything wrong at all. They just stared at the Yuhuang Xiandu in Li Yundong's hand with their eyes wide open. The two of them saw that the Yuhuang Xiandu was still struggling crazily at first, trembling in Li Yundong's hand. However, as Li Yundong's zhenqi poured in like an avalanche, the Yuhuang Xiandu was soon completely subdued by Li Yundong. The zhenqi left by Su Ling in the past was wiped out by Li Yundong. Chris didn't understand the mystery and difficulty of it. She was just a layman watching the fun. She had originally thought that there would be a strange scene, and she was worried that there would be a fierce battle between cultivators and powerful magical weapons in this community. However, she hadn't expected that the Yuhuang Xiandu would just tremble twice and then stop moving. She breathed a sigh of relief, but she also felt a little disappointed. However, Zi Yuan knew that Li Yundong had calmly recited the famous poem that the owner of this powerful magical weapon had spread throughout the world, and at the same time, he had subdued this powerful magical weapon with his powerful zhenqi. In such a short time, he had subdued a Jinshin-level powerful magical weapon. Even if this kind of leisurely walking skill was not unparalleled in the world, it was definitely rare in the world. After Li Yundong subdued the Yuhuang Xiandu, he played with the powerful magical weapon in his hand. He smiled slightly, raised his hand, and said to Zi Yuan, "Take it." At this time, Zi Yuan waved her hand and called the 9th heaven Zi Yuan silk to her. The long, silk-like powerful magical weapon drilled into her sleeve like a spirit snake. When Zi Yuan saw that Li Yundong had thrown the Yuhuang Xiandu to her, she was surprised. She reached out to take it and asked curiously, "Why did you give it to me?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Keep it for self-defense. Your 9th heaven Zi Yuan silk is a very powerful magical weapon. Even if you encounter a powerful magical weapon like the Shen Yuan sword, it's not like you don't have the power to fight back. But this Yuhuang Xiandu is the absolute nemesis of your powerful magical weapon. It's best for you to keep it, in case someone uses it to kill you one day." However, Zi Yuan smiled and said, "It's in your hands. I don't need to worry. You have more enemies than me, so you should take it." Seeing that Zi Yuan was about to throw the Yuhuang Xiandu over, Li Yundong smiled and said, "Okay, just take it. Don't push it around." As he said this, Li Yundong glanced at Zi Yuan, and his gaze suddenly became a little strange, as if he was saying, "Maybe one day, if I have a conflict with Wang Yuanshan and you have to help your master, won't you hate me if I use this powerful magical weapon to kill you?" Li Yundong's thoughts were like flying immortals from beyond the sky. They were extremely jumpy, but the thoughts revealed in his eyes were seen by Zi Yuan. She actually understood 70 to 80% of them. She also cast a glance at Li Yundong, as if to say, "I will never be your enemy in this life. Even if you use this powerful magical weapon to suppress me, I will be willing and never fight back. If one were to say who Li Yundong loved the most among the women around him, it would undoubtedly be Su Chan, who had gone through thick and thin with him. But if one were to say who understood him the best, it would undoubtedly be Zi Yuan. The two of them exchanged glances, and the two of them suddenly had a sense of tacit understanding. They looked at each other and smiled slightly. At the same time, they had the thought of my parents gave birth to me, and Zi Yuan, Yundong, knows me. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said softly to Zi Yuan, "You should take it. This is what you deserve. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid that Su Chan and Chris would have been in danger this time. Then it would be too late for me to regret it." However, Zi Yuan smiled and said, "Speaking of which, Su Chan saved my life. If it weren't for her prison painting, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to escape this disaster. In my opinion, we might as well give this powerful magical weapon to Su Chan to use. She doesn't have any powerful magical weapons with her. Keeping this powerful magical weapon can be used for self-defense." Li Yundong thought for a moment, but still shook his head and said, "No, she likes to be lazy. If she has this powerful magical weapon, she will have even more reason to be lazy. Don't spoil her. It's better for you to take it." Chris, who was standing to one side, saw the two of them pushing and treating each other with respect. This kind of behavior was really a little strange in the eyes of Westerners. She wanted to shout, "Since you don't want it, then give it to me." However, if such words were spoken by a boorish man like Hardadef, he would have most likely blurted it out. However, Chris was a well-mannered lady from a respectable family. Although she thought so, she interrupted their concession and said, "I say, can you guys discuss this, the ownership of the magic treasure later? Can I ask, where is Han Zhen now? Also, has my soul detachment been lifted?" At this time, Li Yundong no longer pushed Zi Yuan. He nodded to her. Although his smile was gentle, his eyes were very firm, asking her to accept it. Zi Yuan couldn't refuse, so she had no choice but to accept it. In her heart, she had made up her mind to find an opportunity to hand it over to Su Chan. Seeing that she had accepted it, Li Yundong looked around and said to Chris, "If I were Han Zhen, no matter who won or lost, I would definitely escape to a safe place to hide first and ask others to help me keep an eye on the situation outside. After the outcome of the battle is determined, I will show up." Li Yundong pointed to the messy scene around him and said, "Han Zhen is obviously not a fool. He must be hiding here foolishly waiting for the result." Chris bit her lip and said hatefully, "This bastard, how dare he attack my grandma? I will never let him off." As she said this, she said anxiously to Li Yundong, "That bad Taoist is dead. Should my soul detachment be lifted?" Li Yundong's gaze became a little strange. "It has been lifted." Chris immediately felt relieved and patted her chest. "That's good. As long as Grandma is fine," she said hesitantly, "but the soul detachment lost its effect because the caster forcibly left, so the last part of your grandma's soul also dissipated." This sentence shocked Chris as if she had been struck by lightning. She trembled all over and her eyes suddenly widened. "What? You mean, my grandmother, she—" Chris covered her mouth, and her big blue eyes were full of tears. In an instant, her eyes became hazy. She knelt down in front of Li Yundong and sobbed, "Master, please save my grandma. As long as you save her, I will do anything you ask me to do." Chapter 770. Seeing that Chris was kneeling before him, Li Yundong immediately helped her up with both hands. He smiled slightly and said, "Chris, don't worry. Let's hear Zi Yuan finish." As he said this, he pretended to be angry and looked at Zi Yuan. "Aren't you afraid of scaring me to death?" Zi Yuan smiled helplessly. "I haven't had time to finish. Chris, although your grandma's soul has dissipated, it's not impossible to save her." Chris was overjoyed. After being supported by Li Yundong, she stood up, wiped away her tears, and said happily, "Zi Yuan, can you save my grandma?" Zi Yuan shook her head and said with a smile, "I don't have such great ability. I can't bring a person back from the dead." Chris was stunned and said disappointedly, "Then who can save my grandma?" Zi Yuan pointed at Li Yundong and said with a chuckle, "She's far away, but she's right in front of you. Why are you begging me instead of the real Buddha in front of you?" Chris turned her face and looked at Li Yundong as if she were looking at a savior. "Master, do you have a way?" Li Yundong looked at Zi Yuan helplessly and said cautiously, "It's a matter of life and death. I don't dare to boast. Let's go and see." As soon as he finished speaking, Chris's phone suddenly rang. As soon as she picked it up, she heard her sister, Kurt, crying, "Chris, Grandma has passed away. Where are you?" Chris was shocked, but she still looked at Li Yundong with hope. She answered the phone, "Kurt, I'll be right there. Don't sign it yet." Chris was extremely anxious. After hanging up the phone, she said to Li Yundong, "Master, please get up and save my grandma. The hospital has announced that she is officially dead." Li Yundong nodded. He glanced at Zi Yuan and motioned for her to go with him. Zi Yuan also nodded gently in agreement. At this time, Li Yundong walked over to Su Chan's side, gently patted her cheek, and said softly, "Chan'er, we are going to the hospital. Do you want to continue sleeping here, or do you want to go with us?" Su Chan was a light sleeper, so when Li Yundong patted her, she immediately woke up in a daze. At first, she was still rubbing her eyes, but as soon as she heard that Li Yundong was going to leave her behind, she immediately tensed up. Her drowsiness disappeared in an instant, and she grabbed onto Li Yundong tightly as if she was afraid that he would disappear the next second. "No, you can't leave me behind. I want to go with you." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Then let's go. We can't stay here for long. Be careful that someone will sue us for trespassing." Although Su Chan had just experienced a dangerous battle and was exhausted, with Li Yundong by her side, she was extremely calm and composed. She smiled somewhat carelessly and said, "It's okay. Who can see us so late at night?" As soon as she finished speaking, she heard the sound of sirens coming from outside, followed by the flashing lights outside. A man shouted through the loudspeaker, "People inside, listen up. You've been surrounded. Raise your hands and come out immediately. All right, speak of the devil and he will appear." Li Yundong and the others looked at each other. Su Chan couldn't help but burst into laughter and said angrily, "Look at you, Jinx. As soon as I said the police came." Although Li Yundong was very bad at English, even if he didn't understand such words, he had seen a lot of American blockbusters. The police always appeared in this tone, so he could guess what the other party was saying. Li Yundong pretended to be angry and glared at Su Chan. "Nonsense, it's obviously you. As soon as you said it was okay, something happened." Su Chan made a face at him and said, "Then I will specifically say bad things next time. What if something happens again?" Li Yundong held back his laughter and glared at her. "That means that you have the authentic 99th level of the Jinx." The two of them didn't pay any attention to the police outside at all. They laughed and bickered as if there was no one else around. Zi Yuan also watched from the side with a smile, not panicking at all. Chris reacted very quickly. She gritted her teeth and cursed in a low voice. "It must be Han Zhan. This bastard must have seen us coming back, so he called the police." Li Yundong shook his head and said with a smile, "Isn't it too fast?" Chris snorted coldly and said, "This must be a patrol officer patrolling nearby. He came as soon as he received the news. If we don't leave soon, he'll call for more people." Li Yundong used to be an otaku. He had watched a lot of Hollywood blockbusters and played a lot of games like Speedy. Naturally, he knew that the American police system was like a hornet's nest. If one was provoked, a group of them would definitely be provoked. If a group of them were provoked, then it would be over. The hornet's nest would go berserk. At the highest level, the sea, the air, and the sea were all chasers. Even if Li Yundong was not afraid, it would be really annoying to have a group of hornets chasing after him. Li Yundong stopped bickering with Su Chan. He waved to Su Chan and Zi Yuan, then flew out from the back of the house with Chris. Zi Yuan and Su Chan also followed closely behind him. After a while, the group of people flew to Harrisburg Hospital. It was the middle of the night. After receiving a call from the hospital, Chris' sister, Kurt, put on some clothes and rushed over. She had a pair of swollen eyes, and her face was full of fatigue. She sat beside the bed, quietly waiting for Chris' arrival. Her husband, Charlotte, was also next to her, his head drooping sleepily, struggling to support himself. When she saw Chris, Kurt immediately stood up, and the two sisters hugged each other tightly. Kurt knew that Chris had a very close relationship with Lin Guoying, far more than their parents. Lin Guoying's death would definitely make her the most sad, so she patted Chris on the shoulder and comforted her. "Chris, I'm sorry. Grandma went to heaven. At least she didn't suffer when she left." To Kurt's surprise, Chris did not look sad. Instead, she said to Kurt, "Don't rush to a conclusion. When did the hospital diagnose Grandma's death?" As soon as she finished speaking, a woman's voice came from the side. "It was the diagnosis I gave before." The people in the room turned their heads and saw a tall, beautiful woman in a white robe standing at the door. The woman's eyebrows were like a painting, her eye sockets were deep, and the bridge of her nose was high. She was quite beautiful, but the black-rimmed glasses on the bridge of her nose made her look especially reserved and conceited. Chris hesitated for a moment and asked, "You are?" The woman took the initiative to shake hands with Chris. As she spoke, she flipped through the patient's records in her arms. "My name is Lydia Selina. You can call me Dr. Lisa. I'm your grandmother's attending physician." Well, about 30 minutes ago, 27 minutes ago to be exact, the patient's detector suddenly couldn't detect any signs of life. Although we took emergency measures, it didn't work at all, so we could only declare her dead. "I'm very sorry about this news." Chris shook her head. "No, my grandmother is not dead yet." Dr. Lisa had seen many grief-stricken family members stubbornly believe that the patient was not dead, so she did not seem surprised at all. She pushed up her glasses and comforted, "I can understand how you feel, but the facts at hand are irreversible. Please don't be too sad." Chris shook her head stubbornly. "No, my grandmother is really not dead. She can still be saved." Dr. Lisa looked at Kurt and her husband helplessly. Kurt stepped forward and gently put his arm around Chris's shoulder. "Chris, I can understand how you feel. You are very sad, and so am I. But Grandma is indeed dead. She has gone to the embrace of God. We should pray for her, and not insist on some meaningless things here." Chris still shook her head. "Sister, you don't understand. Grandma is not dead. Someone can save her." Kurt was stunned. "Who?" Chris looked at Li Yundong and said with a firm expression, "Him." Kurt, Lisa, and Kurt's husband, Charlotte, all looked at Li Yundong at the same time. Kurt was stunned for a moment when he saw Li Yundong. Although he was shocked by Li Yundong's bearing and temperament, he still had some doubts in his heart. Where did this guy come from? Although they were both women, according to the principle that opposites attract, Lisa had no reason to dislike a man of the opposite sex who was handsome and had an extraordinary temperament. Unfortunately, after hearing Chris's words, Lisa immediately became vigilant. She turned to Chris and asked, "Who is he?" Chris looked at Li Yundong with a look of admiration. She thought for a moment and said, "He is a doctor." "Well, he is a doctor from a distant and mysterious country." Lisa frowned. "He is a Western doctor?" Chris shook her head. "No, he is a doctor. As the saying goes, 10 doctors, 9 doctors. It was not wrong to say that Li Yundong was a doctor. But unfortunately, people of the same trade were enemies. Lisa was also a doctor and a Western doctor at that. Since the early days of the Republic of China, the May 4th movement had flourished. As medicine belonged to the traditional category, it was also criticized. At that time, many self-proclaimed advanced revolutionaries did not take medicine that could be cured by Western medicine. They would rather die of illness than take a single mouthful of medicine. In China, such extreme attitudes led to the rapid opposition between medicine and Western medicine, and they gradually became mortal enemies. At that time, the backwardness of China led to the Westerners looking at medicine as a symbol of ignorance and backwardness, just like how modern people talked about the medical treatment methods of the indigenous people in Africa that were similar to witchcraft. Due to the various problems that many Western medicine factories in the United States had, the leader of the American Medical Association, Dr. Mandelson, M.D., published a book in 1998 called Confessions of a Medical Trader. This book was a bloody denunciation of Western medicine, and it led to a medical revolution in the medical field in the 1980s, causing Americans to begin to reflect on whether their medical system was truly scientific. However, this revolution did not lead to the Westerners beginning to favor medicine. On the contrary, this revolution especially deepened the rejection and even hatred of Western medicine doctors. Therefore, when Chris revealed Li Yundong's identity, Lisa's face immediately fell. Her good impression of Li Yundong had completely disappeared. For a student like her who had graduated from the medical school of Pennsylvania State University, medicine was equivalent to witchcraft in her eyes, and it was equivalent to ignorance and stupidity. How could a proud attending physician like her allow a person who played with witchcraft to act presumptuously in her jurisdiction? Lisa glanced at Li Yundong coldly and sneered. Medicine? Are you talking about the kind of witchcraft that uses women's menstrual blood and rotten wood in coffins as medicine? Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, and Su Chan didn't understand what she was saying, but looking at Lisa's expression, they knew that she was definitely not saying anything good. Li Yundong frowned slightly and said to Chris, "What happened? What did she say?" Chris hesitated for a moment, then translated Lisa's words to Li Yundong. Li Yundong raised his eyebrows and glanced slightly at the conceited and proud female doctor, as if a wise elder was looking at a naughty child. His eyes were full of disdain to argue with the other party. Li Yundong turned around and reached out to touch the acupuncture point on Lin Guiying's forehead. Lisa, who was standing to one side, was proud and arrogant. She was irritated by Li Yundong's gaze, and as if someone had stepped on her tail, she couldn't help but shout, "What are you doing? She's dead." After listening to Chris's translation, Li Yundong didn't look back. "She is indeed dead, but I can save her." Lisa didn't understand. After listening to Chris's translation, she couldn't help but laugh angrily. "Do you think you are Jesus Christ?" Li Yundong waited for Chris to finish translating, then turned back with a smile and said, "I'm not, but I'm better than Jesus Christ." This sentence was so arrogant that Chris hesitated for a moment. She was a little embarrassed to translate it for Li Yundong, but she looked at Li Yundong's conceited expression and then at Lin Guiying, who was lying on the bed with her soul scattered. She gritted her teeth and translated Li Yundong's words truthfully. When the three foreigners in the room heard this, they immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. For God's sake, this guy who looks like a boy, is he a lunatic who just ran out of a mental hospital? How dare he say that he is better than Jesus Christ? Chapter 771. When Kurt's husband, Charlotte, saw Zi Yuan and Su Chan appear, his eyes lit up and he was no longer sleepy. He subconsciously wanted to go up and talk to them, but when he saw Li Yundong next to them, he immediately stopped. Especially when he saw Zi Yuan and Su Chan next to him, he couldn't help but feel sour in his heart. Fortunately, Charlotte had good manners and refrained from going up to provoke him. However, when he heard Li Yundong say that he was better than Jesus, he couldn't bear it. Most of Chris's family were Christians, and Charlotte was also a Christian. How could he hear someone boast that he was better than the God they believed in? Charlotte couldn't help but snort coldly at the doctor and say sarcastically, "If you are better than Jesus, then I am better than God." Chris glanced at her brother-in-law and secretly felt disgusted, but she didn't translate this sentence to Li Yundong, for fear that his bad mood would affect the treatment of Lin Guiying. At this time, she bent down, carefully touched Lin Guiying's head, and called her name in a low voice. Su Chan, who was standing to one side, was suddenly stunned. Her eyes were full of surprise as she asked in a low voice, "Chris, have you cultivated to the yang spirit phase?" Chris was stunned. "No, why do you say that?" Su Chan pointed at Chris's hand and said, "You can come so fast and touch the real thing. It's obvious that your yang spirit is out of your body. But you haven't built the Xueqi phase. Where did your yang spirit come from?" Only then did Chris suddenly come to her senses. She raised her hands and looked at herself in surprise. She reached out and touched herself again. Even she didn't notice the changes. She asked curiously, "Master, am I not invisible and intangible? Why can I touch things now?" Li Yundong turned his head and smiled slightly. "I wanted to take you flying before. You were invisible and had no weight, so it wouldn't increase the burden. When you landed and came to the hospital, I naturally replaced your yin spirit with yang spirit." Chris's eyes widened. "So magical? What's the reason?" Li Yundong smiled and glanced at Zi Yuan. "Let her explain it to you. I want to open up the meridians and blood vessels in your grandmother's body, so that when her soul comes back later, she won't get seriously ill because of the cauldron." Hearing this, Chris didn't dare to disturb Li Yundong anymore. She just looked at Zi Yuan doubtfully. When Zi Yuan saw her looking at her, she smiled faintly and explained softly, "Li Yundong has now comprehended the truth of Buddhism and Taoism. There are no secrets between heaven and earth in his eyes. Although his power is not enough to create everything out of thin air or turn stone into gold, he can still transform and control pure energy within his ability at will." Zi Yuan said, "When your yin spirit left your body before, it was the purest form of energy. Your energy was protected by Li Yundong, so it could stay away from your body and not disperse. At the same time, Li Yundong can also enhance your strength and temporarily turn your yin spirit into a yang spirit, so that you won't be exposed when you meet an acquaintance later. Although it sounds simple, there are definitely no more than 5 people in this world who can do it so easily and without you noticing it. Chris didn't seem to understand and nodded. She thought of the fierce battles that Li Yundong had fought before, and then of the means that Li Yundong had used to turn yin into yang without batting an eyelid. She was shocked and looked at Li Yundong in awe. Master, are you really more powerful than Jesus? At this time, Su Chan suddenly burst into laughter. She said with a smile, Christ Jesus is the recognized Son of God in Christianity and Judaism. He is the spokesman of God's will in the world, or in other words, he is God's missionary in the world. But have you ever heard of any miracles of Christ Jesus in the world? Has he ever fought with anyone? Our Yundong is the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King. In terms of status, he is on the same level as Christ Jesus. However, in terms of strength or fighting, he is much more powerful than Christ Jesus. Chris blinked her eyes and seemed to be a little confused. Zi Yuan said with a smile, let's put it this way. If Christianity is a company, then God is the chairman. Christ Jesus is just a CEO, and a preacher CEO who only talks and doesn't have much practical ability. Although the immovable Wisdom King is also a CEO, when he picks up a weapon to fight people, he is a Buddhist thug, and specializes in dealing with all disobedience. But when he puts down his weapon and turns around, he can become the chairman. Although the status of the two is similar, their strength is completely different. In terms of divine power, I'm afraid that Christianity needs God himself to fight with the immovable Wisdom King. No one else is qualified. Chris was stunned and couldn't help but exclaim in a low voice, oh my gosh! What kind of person did I take as my master? When Li Yundong heard her words, he turned his head and smiled slightly. You took an alien as your master. Aren't you afraid, Earthling? Li Yundong's joke made Su Chan burst into laughter. Zi Yuan smiled, but Chris couldn't laugh at all. Kurt and the others didn't understand what they were talking about. They wanted to know, but they were too embarrassed to ask. In particular, the attending physician Lisa stood by with a sneer on her face, her hands crossed over her chest, waiting to see a joke. Li Yunyang pressed his hand on Lin Guoying's body, and his zhenqi quietly opened up all the blood vessels in Lin Guoying's body. Everyone saw that Lin Guoying's originally gray skin had a trace of blood at this time. Chris was close enough to see these changes clearly. She was ecstatic and wanted to cheer loudly. But just as she was about to raise her head and tell Kurt, who was not far away, the good news, she saw Zi Yuan shake her head at her and quietly point to Li Yundong next to her. Chris saw Li Yundong turn his wrist and take out the burning thumb pot like magic. He lowered his eyes slightly and muttered something. Although Chris didn't know what Li Yundong was going to do, she immediately shut her mouth and watched nervously from the side with rapt attention. Li Yundong seemed to notice her nervousness. He turned his head and smiled at her, saying, people have 3 souls and 7 spirits. Only when the soul dissipates will the person really die. But sometimes, although the soul has dissipated, as long as the body furnace has not been damaged to the point where it can no longer be used, often during the period when the soul has just dissipated, as long as the soul is called back in time, it can bring the person back to life. At this time, Li Yundong was talking to Chris with confidence, but Lisa couldn't stand it anymore. The more she looked at him, the more she felt that Li Yundong was like a wizard playing tricks. She couldn't help but say angrily, what the hell are you doing? As the attending physician, I can't allow you to be so disrespectful to the dead. As she said this, she turned her head and said to Kurt with an angry face, Miss Kurt, I have the responsibility and obligation to remind you that desecrating a corpse is a felony. Kurt hesitated for a moment and said to Chris seriously, Chris, I understand your feelings, but she is also my grandmother. I can't let you do whatever you want. Chris raised her eyebrows and pointed at Lin Guoying. Just as she was about to let her see the changes in Lin Guoying, Zi Yuan whispered to Chris, don't talk. Li Yundong is about to cast a spell. Don't disturb him. Chris's heart skipped a beat and she whispered to Kurt, Sister, I know what I'm doing. Don't worry about it. I'll take all the responsibility. As she spoke, Li Yundong flicked his finger gently on the burning thumb pot. There was a crisp tinkle. Although the sound was quite soft, it was clear and pleasant to listen to, like a clear stream in the mountains. It was bone-chilling. Even people like Lisa, Kurt, and Charlotte, who were full of resentment, couldn't help but tremble and gradually calm down. They saw a visible white halo spread out from the burning thumb pot, like a ripple, spreading in all directions. The burning thumb pot in Li Yundong's hand not only specialized in restraining all kinds of evil spirits in the world, but it also had a great deterrent to the yin spirit and yang spirit floating outside the tripod. Although Zi Yuan was also a Jinshin master and could control Lin Guiying's soul and put it back into her body, she couldn't gather the soul that had already been scattered between heaven and earth. Li Yundong had the burning thumb pot, so she said that Li Yundong could save Lin Guiying. This was also the reason why she said that Li Yundong could save Lin Guiying. The white halo spread out from the burning thumb pot was like a sound wave released by a radar. In the blink of an eye it spread very far. Although Lin Guiying's soul had been driven out of her body by Su Ling, it hadn't drifted far. It had been deliberately controlled by Su Ling in a place, so that it would be convenient for him to call her soul back when he saved her in the future. Otherwise, if the soul was allowed to run around on its own, Su Ling wouldn't be able to save Lin Guiying no matter how powerful he was. Therefore, after the light wave spread out for more than 20 miles, it suddenly hit Lin Guiying's soul, which was wandering around. As soon as Lin Guiying's soul was hit by the white light wave, it was immediately like a wronged ghost meeting an ox head or horse face. It was tightly held and rushed back like lightning. Su Chan and Zi Yuan stared nervously at Li Yundong's burning thumb pot. Su Chan and Zi Yuan stared nervously at Li Yundong's burning thumb pot. They knew that it would only take a split second for the burning thumb pot to take back Lin Guiying's soul. However, if Li Yundong's reaction was a little slow, Lin Guiying's soul would be caught by the burning thumb pot and refined in the blink of an eye. In that case, Lin Guiying would be completely dead. Even if Buddha came in person and God came down to earth, he wouldn't be able to save her. Li Yundong used the special attributes of the yin spirit and yang spirit to search for Lin Guiying's soul and bring it back. However, powerful magical weapons were inanimate objects, and it was hard to tell whether they were good or bad. Although they were psychic, they couldn't be compared to human beings. This was the reason why fists and feet didn't recognize people, and swords didn't have eyes. As cultivators, the two of them naturally had better eyesight and reflexes than ordinary people. They saw the white waves of light spread out from the burning thumb pot quickly retract like the ebbing tide. Then, a few small white spots mixed in with it flew away like lightning. At this time, Li Yundong made his move in an instant. He poked the Shenting acupoint on Lin Guiying's forehead with one hand and shouted in a deep voice, "Soul, come back!" He covered the burning thumb pot with his other hand, then turned his wrist. He held a few small white balls of light that were like ghost fires in his palm and slapped them heavily on the top of Lin Guiying's head. Chapter 772. Li Yundong's palm was extremely fast. With a snap, it hit Lin Guiying's forehead, making her tremble all over. Li Yundong's zhenqi poured into her body like a flood. Lin Guiying's head suddenly stood up, and her hands and feet were trembling. She looked extremely frightening. Lisa and Kurt, who were at the side, had never seen such a scene before. They were so frightened that they screamed. Charlot, who was at the side, was also shocked. He stepped forward and shouted, "Hey, what are you doing?" Kurt also came to his senses at this time and shouted at his husband, "Charlotte, stop him, for God's sake, oh my God!" Charlotte immediately stepped forward and reached out to grab Li Yundong. But as soon as he stretched out his hand, his body seemed to be pushed by a pair of invisible giant hands. In an instant, he flew backward and hit the wall. Like a sticker, he slowly slid down the wall. Kurt and Lisa saw that he was moving so fast, as if he had been hit by a high-speed train. If he hit the wall so hard at such a fast speed, he would probably be in trouble. The two of them screamed in fear at the same time. Kurt hurriedly rushed over, tears almost falling down his cheeks. Lisa was even more nervous and immediately felt Charlotte's pulse. She seemed to be able to foresee terrible conditions such as comminuted fractures and internal bleeding all over the man's body. But as soon as the two of them touched Charlotte's body, they saw Charlotte let out a sigh of relief, still in a state of shock. His hands randomly touched his body, and he couldn't help but exclaim in a low voice, "I'm still alive? I'm still alive." Lisa quickly pinched Charlotte's ribs, arms, and thighs. She was surprised to find that Charlotte was not injured at all. This was obviously against Newtonian physics. Lisa was stunned. She couldn't understand how an adult could fly horizontally in the air and hit a hard wall at such a speed. Why was he not injured at all? Lisa was shocked for a while, but soon she realized that it must have something to do with the black-headed Chinese man in front of her. She turned her head and was so shocked that she couldn't close her mouth. She saw that Lin Guiying's skin, which was originally as pale as a withered tree, had become rosy and elastic. The wrinkles at the corners of her eyes had even disappeared. Lin Guiying's eyelashes, which were supposed to be deader than dead, gently trembled, as if she would open her eyes in the next second. At this time, Kurt and her husband were also shocked by such an abnormality. They stood by the bed in a daze, as if they had seen a miracle, dumbstruck. At this time, Lin Guiying was so excited that her face was flushed. She kept calling her grandmother softly, one voice after another full of affection. Finally, Lin Guiying's eyelids trembled slightly, and she finally opened her eyes. Crazy immediately cheered and hugged Lin Guiying. She cried tears of joy and said, "Grandma, you're awake." "That's great." Lisa watched as Lin Guiying came back to life as if she had seen a ghost. She stammered, "God, this is impossible. This is too inconceivable." Lisa, who had graduated from a university, rushed to Lin Guiying's bed, wishing she could stick her eyes on Lin Guiying's body. After carefully feeling the pulse at Lin Guiying's neck, she finally let out a long sigh and looked at Li Yundong in shock. "How did you do it?" Li Yundong understood this sentence. He smiled slightly and said, "You won't understand even if I tell you." After Lisa asked Chris to translate for her, she was immediately enraged. She wanted to refute, but she didn't know what to say. She could only bite her lip and watch Lin Guiying sit up from the bed with a blank expression. At this moment, in Lisa's eyes, Lin Guiying's skin was fair and rosy. The places that originally had wrinkles seemed to have been smoothed out. Other than the faint crow's feet at the corner of her eyes, there were almost no wrinkles at all. At a glance, this 70 or 80-year-old woman actually looked like a 30 or 40-year-old woman. Thinking of what she had said to Li Yundong before, Lisa flew into a rage out of shame. She said to Crazy, "We need to check the patient immediately. I'll go prepare now." Chris looked at her non-committally. After she went out, she turned her head and said to Lin Guiying with a smile, "Grandma, how do you feel? Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" Lin Guiying's soul had left her body, and it took her a long time to come to her senses. She looked around blankly and said, "Where am I? Why am I in the hospital?" At this time, Kurt also came over and said in surprise, "Grandma, I'm so happy to see you again. Welcome back." Lin Guiying saw Kurt and was stunned for a moment, but then she smiled and said, "It's Kurt. Why are you here?" At this time, Chris quickly told him what had happened, except for the fact that Han Zhen and Su Ling had cast the soul-leaving curse on her. Lin Guiying suddenly patted her head and said, I remember that I fell from the plum blossom stump, and then I seemed to have been floating in the sky. After a while, I seemed to see Ox Head and Horseface coming to catch me, and then I woke up." Lin Guiying's words made Li Yundong, Su Chan, and Zi Yuan laugh. Chris also pursed her lips and smiled. She pointed at Li Yundong and said, "Grandma, this is the Ox Head and Horseface who saved you." Lin Guiying had seen Li Yundong at the beginning and was secretly shocked by his youth and bearing. However, because she didn't understand the situation, she didn't dare to speak for a while. At this time, hearing Crazy's words, she immediately lifted the sheet and was about to get out of bed. Kurt quickly held her and said in a hurry, "Grandma, don't move. Wait for the doctor to check you before you get out of bed." Lin Guiying said disapprovingly, "I'm very good now. Don't stop me. I want to kowtow to my benefactor and thank him." Kurt looked at Crazy helplessly and said, "Crazy, if you don't persuade her, she is not only my grandmother." Chris advised, "Grandma, you've just woken up. Don't move, okay?" Lin Guiying laughed and said, "I feel very good now. It's like I'm dozens of years younger." While they were talking, Lisa and a few nurses rushed over with stethoscopes and some instruments. Lisa saw Lin Guiying, who was about to get off the bed, and immediately shouted, "Don't move, wait for me to check before you move." Lin Guiying frowned, but soon smiled again. "I'm really good. I've never felt so good." However, Lisa did not say anything and put Lin Guiying on the detector. The nurses on the side also carefully looked at the data. After they were busy for a while, A middle-aged nurse looked at the data in front of her and looked at Lin Guiying in shock. She said in a strange tone, "She's very healthy now. She's even stronger than a cow." Lin Guiying laughed and said to Lisa, who was tongue-tied, "What do you think? Are you relieved now?" As she said this, she jumped up from the bed, turned around, knelt down in front of Li Yundong, and kowtowed 3 times. Li Yundong seemed to have expected her to do this. He didn't dodge and accepted it generously. As the saying goes, saving a life is better than building a 7-floor pagoda. Li Yundong had saved Lin Guiying's life, so it was not too much to accept such a big gift from her. After Lin Guiying thanked him, Li Yundong helped her up with a smile and said, "Senior Lin, are you still feeling uncomfortable?" Lin Guiying looked at Li Yundong with flickering eyes. She stared at him for a long time before saying in Chinese, "I'm very good, I can't be better." "You are the Li Yundong that Chris has been talking about, aren't you?" "Good, good, you are indeed a young hero. Not to mention that you are a talented person, you actually have such magical abilities at such a young age. Amazing, really amazing." As she said this, she looked at Zi Yuan and Su Chan, who were next to her. She had rarely heard Chris talk about them, so she couldn't figure out their relationship with Li Yundong for a while. She just kept praising their beauty and temperament. Lin Guiying was an old and shrewd person. This time, she had been resurrected, so she was naturally in a good mood. She deliberately complimented Su Chan and made her laugh. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan also smiled. Li Yundong laughed and said, "Senior Lin, don't be so polite. This is what I should do. You don't have to be so polite." Lin Guiying laughed and said, "It's not strange to be polite. What's more, it's not a small matter to save your life. Little fairy, if you have any requests, just tell me. As long as it's within my ability, I will definitely promise you." As she said this, she stared at Li Yundong with bright eyes. Li Yundong waved his hand with a smile and said, "If I ask for something, wouldn't it become a debt of gratitude?" However, Lin Guiying said seriously, "If I don't do something, wouldn't I be ungrateful?" After that, the two of them looked at each other and laughed. Li Yundong smiled and said to Chris, "Chris, persuade your grandmother." Chris knew that it was difficult for others to persuade Li Yundong when he insisted on something, so she secretly made up her mind to discuss with her grandmother in private how to repay Li Yundong for saving her life. Her eyes flashed, and she said to Lin Guiying with a smile, "Grandma, let's talk about these things later. Shall we go back now?" Lin Guiying reacted very quickly and no longer insisted. She turned to Kurt and Charlotte with a smile and said in English, "Kurt, Charlotte, let's go back. I've had enough of this damn place." Charlotte and Kurt looked at each other and naturally nodded in agreement, but they couldn't help looking at Li Yundong, who had a faint smile on his lips. At first, Charlotte had been a little jealous of Li Yundong, but after suffering and seeing that Li Yundong had miraculously saved the dead Lin Guiying, he didn't dare to be disrespectful to Li Yundong. He muttered in his heart, Is this guy really more powerful than Jesus?" At this time, Lisa also suddenly came to her senses. Seeing that Li Yundong and the others were about to leave, she rushed over and reached out to pat Li Yundong on the shoulder. However, Li Yundong seemed to have eyes on the back of his head. He quietly moved sideways and avoided her pat. He turned his head and said with a smile, "What's the matter?" Lisa looked at Li Yundong. For a moment, her lips wriggled, but she didn't know what to say. In a hurry, she turned to Chris and said, "Can you help me ask him if he really used medical skills?" At this time, before Li Yundong could say anything, Lin Guiying, who was standing to one side, suddenly laughed. She said to Lisa, "Dr. Lisa, thank you for your treatment, but don't think that things you don't know don't exist, and don't think that things you don't know are ignorant superstitions. Even a great scientist like Einstein was a devout believer of God. You Westerners believe in God and believe that there is heaven and gods, so why do you think that we Easterners don't believe in gods?" Her words made Lisa speechless. After Li Yundong and the others listened to Chris's translation, they all cheered. Lisa stood there in a daze. What she had seen tonight had instantly subverted her worldview and outlook on life. She stared at Li Yundong and the others like a wooden stake as they left. After a long time, a nurse came up and asked in a low voice, "Hey, Lisa, what did she say just now?" The corners of Lisa's eyes twitched, and she said with a strange expression, she said, "Forget it, don't care what she said. What about you? What do you think of what just happened?" The nurse shrugged her shoulders and said, Come back to life? It's amazing, isn't it? But in my opinion, it's very simple. Obviously, God is a dark-headed, yellow-skinned countryman. So, a miracle happened, didn't it? God is a countryman. Lisa repeated her words in surprise, but then she shook her head and said, "No, it's definitely not like that. I don't believe it. This must be a hoax. I must expose this hoax." As she said this, the flame of Lisa's heart once again burned like a fighter. She felt an unprecedented sense of responsibility and crisis on her shoulders. In her opinion, if there really were such magical people and things in the world, then what was the use of Western medicine? What was the use of her? For everything she had learned, for everything she believed in, she had the responsibility and obligation to expose this hoax. Chapter 773. Lin Guiying's Resurrection shocked Crazy's family. At this time, the family members who were rushing back from other places were extremely shocked when they heard the news. At the banquet held for Lin Guiying's resurrection, Li Yundong became the center of attention at the banquet. Many people were inquiring about this magical national boy. Although Lin Guiying had delegated the family's affairs after her children grew up, and she no longer cared about the family's affairs, her family's prestige was still extremely high. When they heard the news of her death, the old and young of the family put down their affairs and prepared to rush back to attend the funeral. Lin Guiying had 3 sons and 2 daughters. The eldest son was in charge of the family's light industry, the second son was in charge of the subsidiary companies, and the remaining 3 sons were not interested in the family business. They became lawyers and now had a large law firm in Boston. Her eldest daughter was her eldest son's assistant. The two had been partners for many years, and the family business was thriving. The youngest daughter was a traveling painter. Lin Guiying's 3 sons were very successful. All of them were boys. It was not until the eldest son, Finley, divorced his first wife and married a Pennsylvania beauty pageant girl that he finally gave birth to Kurt and then to Crazy. Crazy was the youngest member of this thriving family, but everyone knew that she was the apple of Lin Guiying's eye. Especially this time, she had brought back a master, who was said to be worshipped in the country to save Lin Guiying, which made her become the focus of this banquet. Crazy was also very obediently accompanying Lin Guiying, and they were inseparable. Next to her was Li Yundong, who had always kept a certain distance from her. Naturally, next to Li Yundong were Zi Yuan and Su Chan. It was not the first time that Su Chan and Zi Yuan had attended a banquet. Their beauty would attract everyone's attention wherever they went. At this banquet, many men who wanted to come up and chat up the two of them covetously stared at them. However, many people saw Li Yundong, who was next to them, and saw a few losers who wanted to go up and chat up the two of them but came back dejectedly because of the language barrier. Most of the men gave up the idea. Li Yundong watched from the side as Chris skillfully dealt with every family member and guest who came forward to greet her. He saw that from time to time, Chris was pulled aside and whispered to someone. From time to time, she would leave within 3 meters of him, so he had to follow her. For a moment, he frowned. When Chris finally stopped, Li Yundong stepped forward and whispered to her, "Chris, we should go back. Your Yin spirit has been out of your body for too long." At this time, Chris was under Li Yundong's protection and temporarily turned into a Yang spirit body. She was no different from an ordinary person, as if she had a doppelganger technique. She almost forgot that she was a Yin spirit out of her body. Chris was stunned. She looked back at Li Yundong with a hopeful expression and said softly, "Master, can you stay a little longer? My grandma wants to thank you properly. Besides, didn't you say that as long as I'm by your side, it doesn't matter how long it takes?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "But you are often dragged around by others, and I can only run around with you. Don't you see how others look at us?" Chris looked around strangely. Sure enough, she saw many elders of the family tilting their heads to look at her and Li Yundong, as if they were looking at the two inseparable people. There was a hint of ambiguity in their eyes. Chris blushed and whispered, "I see. We'll go back later, okay?" Li Yundong had been out with Chris for nearly a day. He was worried about Zhou Qin, who was in seclusion at home, so he didn't dare to stay any longer. Hearing Chris's words, he nodded and said, "Okay, you can say goodbye to your family first, but it's not suitable for you to stay for too long. When your Yin spirit returns to your body, you can come back if you want." Chris lowered her eyes and flickered. She had already made up her mind to let go of everything and learn cultivation from Li Yundong. It was even very likely that this would be the last time she would come back. Just as the two of them were whispering, Lin Guiying came over and looked at them with a smile. "What are you talking about?" Chris naturally couldn't tell Lin Guiying that Li Yundong was urging her to go back. She rushed to say, "Nothing. Grandma, how do you feel now?" Lin Guiying laughed and said, "You've asked this question many times, my dear Chris. I'm very good. I've never felt so good." As she spoke, Lin Guiying turned her face and thanked Li Yundong seriously. She had already learned from Chris that Li Yundong was a cultivator. "Zhenren Li, thank you so much. If you need any help in the future, just tell me." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Senior Lin, don't be so polite all the time. Chris and I are good friends, and she is my nominal disciple. It's only right for me to help her." Lin Guiying smiled. Although they hadn't known each other for a long time, the shrewd Lin Guiying could still see that Li Yundong was a rather conceited man. He wouldn't easily take the initiative to ask for help, so she didn't continue to dwell on this issue. She opened her mouth and was about to speak when she heard a happy cry from the side. "Grandma, you're here." Lin Guiying turned her head and saw a beautiful middle-aged woman standing not far away. She was about 40 years old, with black hair and blue eyes. She had obvious mixed-race characteristics. It was her youngest daughter, Ailey. Standing next to her was a girl of about 23 or 24 years old. She had red curly hair and was wearing a boy's suspenders and a Snoopy cartoon gown. The girl was very beautiful, no less than Chris. Her blue eyes were looking at Li Yundong curiously. Obviously, she had also heard that it was the boy in front of her who had magically saved Lin Guiying from death. Lin Guiying and Ailey hugged each other affectionately. Ailey kissed her mother's cheek twice and looked up and down at her elderly grandmother. She couldn't help but praise, "Grandma, you look like a sister to me now. How did you regain your youth?" This sentence made everyone next to them laugh, and Lin Guiying couldn't stop smiling. She pointed to Li Yundong next to her and said, "Then you have to ask him." Ailey knew a few words, but her level was very poor. After reluctantly greeting Li Yundong to express her gratitude, she smiled and said to Lin Guiying, "Grandma, if dying can make me 30 years younger, then let me die once too." The people next to them laughed again. At this time, the girl next to Ailey suddenly spoke. Her words were quite authentic, and as soon as she opened her mouth, Li Yundong was shocked. The girl had an innocent look on her face. She looked at Li Yundong like a curious baby, then looked at Chris and asked, "Are you Chris's boyfriend? Have you slept with her?" Even though Li Yundong's cultivation was extremely high, when he suddenly heard such a question in front of an elder like Lin Guiying, Chris, Su Chan and Zi Yuan, and the girl's mother, he was so shocked that he almost fell to the ground. Su Chan and Zi Yuan, who were standing to one side, blushed when they heard this. They secretly scolded her for being shameless and turned their faces away, as if they felt ashamed to look at the girl one more time. Lin Guiying was a typical traditional Chinese woman, who paid attention to modesty. Chris had been brought up by her, so she also followed suit in this aspect. When they heard the girl's words, the corners of their eyes suddenly twitched. They all knew that Ailey's daughter was a genius with a high IQ who had graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. However, although her IQ was high, her EQ was a little low. Her style was similar to that of a boy, being bold and bold. They hadn't expected her to be so bold and open to such an extent with such a low EQ. Ailey was also extremely embarrassed. She coughed dryly and motioned for her daughter to pay attention to the situation. "Hey, sea jelly, don't talk nonsense." However, the girl looked at Li Yundong unrelentingly, her eyes full of strong interest. Li Yundong calmed down, shook his head, and said, "No, Chris is not my girlfriend." Sea Jelly's eyes lit up and immediately asked, "Then can I be your girlfriend? Can I sleep with you?" Ailey immediately covered her forehead and groaned, "Oh God!" Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. His expression was strange. He turned his head and waved at Su Chan, motioning for her to come over. Then, he put his arm around her small waist and said with a smile, "She is my girlfriend. I'm sorry." Su Chan made a face at Sea Jelly, her eyes full of pride. She smiled and put her arms around Li Yundong's waist, whispering in his ear, "This woman is so shameless. How can she ask such a thing as soon as we meet?" Li Yundong patted her face intimately, motioning for her not to speak. See, Jelly didn't take Su Chan's expression to heart. She quickly asked, "Then what's your relationship with Chris?" Before Li Yundong could speak, Chris was afraid that See Jelly would say something embarrassing again, so she quickly said, "See Jelly, he is my master. You have to respect him." "Master?" See Jelly looked at Li Yundong in surprise and said to Chris, "He looks younger than you." Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "You speak the national language well, but have you ever heard of a national saying? Age does not matter in learning, only those who are capable can be the teacher." At this time, Lin Guoying also praised, "That's good. If possible, I also want to worship Zhenren Li as my master." See Jelly blinked her eyes. "Then I also want to worship you as my master. Can you accept me as your disciple?" Li Yundong suddenly felt very embarrassed. He didn't want to accept any disciple, especially a foreign one. If it hadn't been for Chris's luck, if it hadn't been for her yearning for and familiarity with the national culture, Li Yundong would never have accepted a foreign devil as a disciple. But now he was a guest at Chris's house, and See Jelly could be considered Chris's sister. If he refused her too stiffly, he was afraid that he would offend her, and it would be embarrassing for Chris. But if he agreed, he wouldn't be willing. Who would dare to accept a disciple who asked him if he wanted to sleep with him as soon as they met? Even the Yinyang school had to think about it. Li Yundong hesitated for a moment. Seeing that he was in a dilemma, Su Chan rushed to say, "You can't do it. Yundong is very strict when it comes to accepting disciples." See Jelly smiled disapprovingly and said, "Then test me." As she said this, she turned to Chris and said, "Chris, what did your master test you on?" Chris thought about it awkwardly. She suddenly thought of Hardadef and said, "Master's first requirement is that you must be good." See Jelly immediately laughed and said, "That's too simple. I'm the best. You may not be as good as me." As she said this, she said confidently to Li Yundong, "If you don't believe me, you can test me." Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he soon came up with an idea. He looked around, picked up a flower from the vase on the table, and gave it to Zi Yuan, who had been silent. He said with a smile, "Come, this is for you." Zi Yuan was caught off guard. She was stunned and looked at Li Yundong in surprise. She didn't dare to take the flower. "What do you mean?" Li Yundong smiled slightly, winked at Zi Yuan quietly, and said, "Nothing, just a small gesture." Zi Yuan was a little flustered, but even though she didn't know what was going on, she still reached out and took the flower. Her cheeks were a little red. She held the flower and lowered her head in silence, looking extremely beautiful. Su Chan looked at Li Yundong and then at Zi Yuan. She pouted and said sourly, "Yundong, did you just give me one? Don't you feel embarrassed?" Li Yundong laughed and pinched the little girl's cheek. "It's a piece of cake, a piece of cake." Lin Guoying looked at them strangely and suddenly said, "You young people are really interesting. What do you mean by suddenly giving me flowers?" Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Actually, I don't mean anything else." Su Chan looked at Zi Yuan's hand enviously and said, "Sister Zi Yuan, just take it. Don't be embarrassed." At this time, Li Yundong smiled and said, "I'm the one who's embarrassed." As he said this, he stretched out his palm in front of Zi Yuan and said with a smile, "Zi Yuan, give me the flowers." Zi Yuan handed over the flowers in her hand in a daze. She didn't know what Li Yundong meant by giving flowers and then taking them. Li Yundong took the flowers, turned to See Jelly, and said with a smile, "You think you're good. Can you tell me what we meant when we said so many things just now?" Only then did everyone understand. Su Chan burst into laughter and thought to herself, "I knew that Yundong wouldn't favor one and discriminate against the other. So that's how it is." Zi Yuan breathed a sigh of relief, but she felt a little lost in her heart, as if something important in her heart had been taken away. Chris, who was standing to one side, couldn't help laughing. She turned her head and snickered. This series of words is like a tongue twister, and I feel dizzy listening to it. Master actually asked See Jelly to explain it again. It's really too bad. At this time, See Jelly, who had a very high IQ and boasted of being powerful, was stunned, as if she had been stunned. She wanted to grab her head and shout like crazy. Is there anyone who is so abnormal? There were so many meanings. What did they mean? Chapter 774. Lin Guiying looked at Sea Jelly, who was going crazy, and said with a smile, Sea Jelly, although you are a genius at MIT, it is not so easy to boast that you are proficient. Sea Jelly looked at Lin Guiying with a depressed face, pouted, and said unhappily, Grandma, why didn't I feel that it was so difficult before? Lin Guiying laughed so hard that her mouth was a little crooked. Silly child, it is the most difficult language in the world. What's more, what you heard just now is vernacular. The most difficult is speech. Some of it is difficult for me to read, let alone you. Sea Jelly turned her head dejectedly and said to Li Yundong, who was trying to hold back his laughter, Well, I admit that I can't do it, but when I learn it well, I will come to you to be my master. You can't refuse. Li Yundong felt that it was a little unkind of him to tease a foreigner like this. He straightened his face and was about to speak when he suddenly heard a voice beside him. Li Yundong turned his head and saw Lin Guiying's attending doctor, Lisa, coming over. The doctor had obviously come with a purpose. After greeting Lin Guiying and the others warmly, she looked straight at Li Yundong. She walked up to Li Yundong, stretched out her hand generously, and said, Hello, we meet again. Although Li Yundong saw that she had come with bad intentions, he still reached out his hand politely and shook hands with her, nodding and smiling. After greeting Li Yundong, Lisa stared at him and asked straightforwardly, Mr. Li, please forgive my offense. I want to ask you, did you use medical skills to save Mrs. Lin before? If so, where did the scientific evidence come from? After I went back, I tossed and turned for a long time, but I still couldn't figure it out. Can you explain it to me? Li Yundong listened to her babbling, but he was confused. He could only understand some of the words, but he couldn't understand what they meant when they were put together. He had no choice but to turn his head to look at Chris. Chris smiled and once again acted as a temporary interpreter. After listening to the translation, Li Yundong couldn't help but ponder. Although the words in front of him seemed very polite, in fact, there was a deep meaning in them. How should he answer? Were his divine arts also considered medical techniques? Obviously not. However, if he said no, it would be wrong because the most fundamental origin of cultivation came from medicine, from the Yellow Emperor's canon of internal medicine. This was a bit of a dilemma. If he didn't answer well, he might be chased by the other party. Li Yundong pondered for a moment, then said, Miss Lisa, may I ask if your cloning technology is a kind of Western technology? After Chris finished translating, Lisa was clearly silent for a moment. She shook her head hesitantly, but quickly nodded in agreement. Since cloning technology is also a type of Western medicine, then the method I use to save Lin Guiying is also a type of Chinese medicine. It's just that very few people know how to use this method. Lisa hadn't expected Li Yundong's answer to be so cunning. She frowned and asked unwillingly, Mr. Li, although I don't understand how you saved Mrs. Lin, I admire your means. Also, if medicine is really so powerful, why do so many people want to learn Western medicine? Why do so many people want to take our Western medicine? Why do so many people even propose to abolish Chinese medicine? This is a medical skill that was born and raised in your own country. Since so many people oppose it, doesn't that mean something is wrong? Her words were so powerful that Su Chan and Zi Yuan, who were next to her, couldn't help but look at each other in dismay after hearing Crazy's translation. Yes, even the people themselves were superstitious about Western medicine and thought that medicine was pseudoscience. So many people went to study Western medicine every year, and so many people went to advanced medical schools abroad to study, but how many foreigners came to study Chinese medicine every year? Lisa was really powerful. She wanted to make trouble, but she didn't get to the bottom of Li Yundong's previous method of saving Lin Guiying. Instead, she used the views of the Chinese public as a starting point. Because Lisa knew that no matter what, Li Yundong had saved a patient they had declared dead. Even if it proved that Li Yundong was pretending to be mysterious, the facts were right in front of them, and the facts spoke louder than words. Therefore, she adopted a roundabout strategy and used the attitude of the people to make a breakthrough. Zi Yuan and Su Chan were a little worried, afraid that Li Yundong would be stumped by the woman in front of them. After all, what Lisa said was also the current objective situation of China, and it was also the truth, and the facts spoke louder than words. But he couldn't not answer. Medicine was a basic course for cultivators. It was fine in front of the people, but if he didn't say a few words for medicine in front of outsiders, he would really be a cultivator in vain. At this time, Lin Guiying and Chris also listened carefully to Li Yundong's sharp question, wanting to hear how he would answer. When Li Yundong heard Lisa's words, he frowned secretly. He knew that if medicine was refuted, then all cultivators would become a joke. It was equivalent to having their ancestral graves dug up. In Li Yundong's opinion, even if their way of cultivation was refuted, they absolutely could not let medicine be refuted, because this was the quintessence of the Chinese nation that had been passed down for thousands of years. It could even be said that it was the foundation of this nation. Lisa was not the first person to stand up and dig up the ancestral graves of cultivators. When Li Yundong was taking care of Xueqi, who was bedridden, he had met a well-known expert, who also had the attitude of opposing medicine and believing in Western medicine and digging up ancestral graves. The most embarrassing thing in the world was that people themselves opposed the things of their own country, discarded the essence as dregs, and dug up their own ancestral graves. But what was even more embarrassing was that foreigners pointed out this point in front of the people, and in front of the people, they dug up ancestral graves with their grandsons. Li Yundong was unhappy, and his face darkened slightly. He thought for a moment and said, "You asked me a few questions. I'll answer you in a moment, but before I answer you, I also want to ask you a few questions." Without waiting for Lisa to agree, Li Yundong said first, "Dr. Mandelson, the president of your American Medical Union, once wrote a book called Confessions of a Medical Rebel. In it, he strongly criticized and even attacked Western medicine that you are proud of. He said that hospitals are legal places to hurt and kill people. Every year in the United States at least 1.5 million people die or become disabled because of chemicals. Answer me, if your Western medicine is scientific, then why did your medical leader say such a thing?" After listening to Chris's translation, Lisa opened her mouth and was anxious to speak, but at this time, Li Yundong did not wait for her to speak. He raised his hand and said, "When I first started to study. Well, when I was studying medicine, I once felt what you said. Why do our people oppose our own medicine? Later I was unwilling to give up, so I flipped through a lot of materials and books, but I was also surprised to find a lot of things about Western medicine. For example, antibiotics can be said to be the largest type of Western medicine. When people are sick, they think of it first and regard antibiotics as a panacea. However, this so-called panacea also has a big problem. Not to mention other things, nearly 80% of the 50 million deaf people in our country are related to the use of streptomycin and gentamicin. I once accidentally saw a material. According to the observation of our country's Xi'an 4th Military Medical University, among 590 hospitalized cancer patients, the infection rate of those who had not used or only used one kind of antibiotic was 9.5%. The rate of those who had used more than one kind of antibiotic was 6.5%, which was 4 times that of the former. That is to say, the more antibiotics used, the higher the infection rate. Because of this, our country is now gradually no longer using streptomycin and gentamicin. But unfortunately, they are still using other antibiotics. Yes, you have to say that medicine is also constantly developing, and the same is true of medicine. So do you know that the white wheat bean used to treat pregnancy vomiting was developed by your Western medicine laboratory and declared as a harmless scientific product? But soon, the terrible side effects produced thousands of deformities. Now, white wheat bean is listed as a banned drug, and the Japanese pharmaceutical company that produced this drug went bankrupt. Not only that, your Western medicine's scientific demonstration convinced that steroids could cure the American singer Michael Jackson's leukoplakia. But then, Western medicine scientifically said that the use of steroids caused Michael's judgment to be seriously weakened, and he did some things that were out of control. Similarly, you also once said that biphosphates were mainly used for the treatment of hypercalcemia, osteoporosis, and bone pain. Not long after, the FDA monitored and announced that cancer patients who received intravenous biphosphates would have symptoms of jaw-bone necrosis. He said with fervor and assurance, "If you know these things, then can you tell me that the Western medicine that you announced to be harmless today, will something like that happen tomorrow? How do you make your Western medicine? I believe you know it best. They are all experimented with mice in the laboratory. After the mice eat it and don't die, they give it to the patients for free. After taking it for a few months, they find that they are fine, so they announce the birth of a new scientific drug. Your medicine was experimented on by mice, and then given to people. After a few years, the existing problems were eliminated, and new drugs were replaced. You must have found out why the elimination rate of your Western medicine is so high, and why the replacement rate is so fast. Why is the antibiotic that you are most proud of becoming less and less effective? Li Yundong asked several questions in a row. With a smile on his face, his words revealed an aggressive and pressing momentum. You asked me a few questions. Can you answer them now? As Li Yundong spoke, Chris listened and translated. Lisa's face became uglier and uglier as she listened. Especially when she heard the last part, her mind buzzed and she froze on the spot. She hadn't expected that her accusation of digging up someone's ancestral grave would turn out to be digging up someone's ancestral grave by the other party. Chapter 775. When they were at the Pennsylvania hospital, Li Yundong rarely spoke. Most of the time, he was like a taciturn young man with a gentle smile. If it weren't for his calm demeanor, Lisa would have thought that he was just a very handsome young college student. But at this time, when they clashed, the proud attending physician realized that the man in front of him, who didn't seem to talk much, was actually so sharp-tongued. Su Chan and Zi Yuan also looked at each other and smiled. This was not the first time they had seen Li Yundong's eloquence. When it came to arguing, Li Yundong had never lost. Lin Guoying, who was standing to one side, also looked at Li Yundong with sparkling eyes. She was surprised in her heart. I've lived for decades, but I've never seen such a person, whether in China or in the West. I originally thought that Li Yundong was an amazing cultivator with extremely strong strength, but I didn't expect that he would also be so eloquent. Other people didn't know the importance of eloquence among many talents, but Lin Guoying knew it very well. When she was young, she had met a cultivator who taught her the plum blossom fist, but the cultivator was not eloquent. He only let Lin Guoying memorize the mystery of it and didn't give her much guidance. She had almost relied on her own understanding to get to where she was today, so she had suffered from her master's poor eloquence. Since ancient times, whether it was the medical world, the martial arts world, or the cultivation world, it was very easy for a great cultivator to become famous in the world. As long as he could fight, he would be invincible in the world. Naturally, everyone knew about him. But if he wanted to maintain such a reputation, he had to be able to practice, which meant that he had to be able to maintain his health. Otherwise, if he fought all day, his zhenqi would be consumed like running water, and he wouldn't be able to make ends meet. It was easy for him to become weaker and weaker, and he wouldn't be able to last for long. However, if he wanted to spread his wings, establish a sect, and make it pass on and flourish, it was absolutely impossible without good eloquence. Otherwise, how could he let his disciple understand the true method he had comprehended with his own abilities? Whether it was Taoism or Buddhism, if he wanted to pass it on to his disciple, not only did the disciple need to have extraordinary talent and comprehension ability, but also the master needed to have extraordinary eloquence and the ability to teach. Many great perfected Taoists, martial artists, and great doctors were usually very powerful and flourishing for a time, but because they were not good at eloquence and teaching people, their earth-shattering abilities would end in a generation. In Lin Guoying's eyes, with Li Yundong's cultivation and eloquence, he would definitely be able to establish a sect in the future and form his own force. It was useless for a master to just be strong. Otherwise, what would be the point of fighting to the death all day long? There will always be talented people in every generation, and in the Yangtze River, the waves behind drive on the waves before. Who knows when a strong person will appear and defeat his master? That won't be good. Therefore, at this time, he needed a strong disciple to help him support the sect. Want to fight the boss? Get past me first. Only when the disciple was awesome could the power of the sect be awesome. Lin Guoying believed that with Li Yundong's talent and ability, he would definitely not just want to be a cultivator who only cared about himself. He would definitely want to spread his power. In this way, he would definitely have to accept disciples, and he would definitely not only accept one. Lin Guoying also knew that Chris was now only Li Yundong's nominal disciple, and the difference between a nominal disciple and a formal disciple was equivalent to the difference between a temporary worker and a formal worker. Although they were both disciples, the difference in status was like heaven and earth. However, if she could give Li Yundong considerable help, the word nominal might not be impossible to remove. Thinking of this, Lin Guoying couldn't help but flash her eyes and smile slightly. She already had an idea in her heart. At this time, the battle between Lisa and Li Yundong had also attracted the attention of many people at the banquet. After hearing Chris's translation, many Westerners fell silent. Lisa's face alternated between green and red. As a Western doctor, she naturally knew that what Li Yundong said was true. Even if she wanted to refute it, she couldn't lie with her eyes open. It was just like how Li Yundong also knew that there were many quacks in traditional Chinese medicine. Don't laugh at me. But if she was rendered speechless by the other party's counterattack, that would be too cowardly. Lisa clenched her teeth, stiffened her neck and said, Mr. Li, I asked you the question first. You should answer my question first. Besides, after saying so much, are you trying to prove that traditional Chinese medicine is better than Western medicine? After listening to Chris's translation, Li Yundong thought to himself, this woman is up to no good. She always puts traditional Chinese medicine and Western medicine on opposite sides. She can't wait for the two to kill each other. There can only be one in the world. The remaining one is correct and scientific, and the eliminated one is naturally wrong and ignorant. Li Yundong had also expected that the other party would say such a thing. He smiled slightly and said, since you insist on me answering your question, then why do Chinese people have to learn your Western medicine? In fact, it's very simple. The strength of Western medicine is that it is systematic, simple, and efficient. An ordinary person can become an excellent Western doctor after a few years of learning and can cure diseases and save lives. This is precisely the shortcoming of traditional Chinese medicine. An excellent traditional Chinese medicine doctor can never be called an excellent traditional Chinese medicine doctor without more than 10 or even decades of clinical experience. In China, there are old Chinese medicine doctors, but there has never been old Western medicine doctors. Why? Because the older the traditional Chinese medicine doctor, the more valuable it is. This is an extremely difficult knowledge to study. It is not only about curing diseases and saving lives, but also the truth of the universe. As for why you ask me why so many Chinese people learn Western medicine, and why our country uses Western medicine, then let me tell you, in a country with more than 1 billion people and such a fast pace of life, Western medicine is undoubtedly more in line with the pace of people's lives. When Chris translated this, Lisa raised her eyebrows and asked, so you mean that traditional Chinese medicine is useless? Li Yundong smiled and said, traditional Chinese medicine has its shortcomings. It is because it is too broad and profound and too difficult to study. It takes a long time to learn, a long time to treat, and a slow time to take effect. Therefore, very few people in modern society are willing to put in the effort to study this knowledge. Moreover, traditional Chinese medicine is composed of many prescriptions. There are often as many as a dozen or even dozens of prescriptions in a prescription. Any prescription will have a completely different effect. Therefore, only with a lot of experience and exploration can one be able to use medicine like a god. Similarly, Western medicine also has its own shortcomings. The shortcoming of Western medicine is that it is a knowledge of robbing Peter to pay Paul. When you cure patients, you will hurt their health in other areas. Therefore, entering a Western medicine hospital actually shortens the time of entering the hospital next time. Li Yundong smiled and said, traditional Chinese medicine has its shortcomings. We pay attention to the homology of medicine and food. Medicine is not as good as food, and food is not as good as spiritual. What we pay attention to is to strengthen the body and consolidate the foundation. With the power of heaven and earth and the spirit of all things, we strengthen the human body's own ability to fight against diseases, so that people can go to the hospital less or not go to the hospital at all. As the saying goes, it is better to disperse than to block, and it is better to prevent than to treat. At the end of the day, Western medicine is a knowledge that makes people sicker. It can help you get rid of the disease for a while, but it can't help you get rid of the disease for a lifetime. This knowledge can make people walk into the hospital countless times and willingly be slaughtered by the doctors. Therefore, it is very popular, forming a huge industrial chain and interest group, and it has the support of the government in power. The fundamental point of traditional Chinese medicine is to keep people away from doctors and hospitals, hoping that there will be no diseases in the world. Therefore, it is difficult for it to form a huge interest group and industrial chain. So many people hope that it will die, so that they can slaughter patients more easily. At this point, almost everyone at the banquet noticed Li Yundong's speech. For a moment, the hall was quiet. Everyone was listening to Li Yundong's speech and Chris's timely translation. After hearing Li Yundong's words, Chris, who was at the side, almost broke out in a sweat when translating, if she could sweat at this time. When Li Yundong finished his last words, the hall was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. These foreigners were all stunned, as if a storm had been set off in their hearts. Some broad-minded people lowered their heads and showed a thoughtful look. Lisa's heart was shaken when she heard this. She was tongue-tied and couldn't say anything for a moment. However, Sea Jelly, who had been listening to Li Yundong seriously, suddenly asked, "Do you think Western medicine is the dregs that should be abandoned?" Li Yundong glanced at her and didn't answer her directly. Instead, he said in a diplomatic-like tone, "Western medicine is like the Qinghai Tibet Plateau. The mountains on the plateau are undulating, continuous, magnificent, and can be said to be the roof of the world, holding up the sky. Traditional Chinese medicine is like Mount Everest. Although it is weak, it reaches the peak and reaches the ninth heaven." At this time, Ai Li couldn't help but ask, "Is traditional Chinese medicine really better than Western medicine?" Li Yundong smiled faintly. "Western medicine requires X-rays and a variety of instruments to find out what illness a person is suffering from, but we Chinese medicine practitioners only need to look, listen, question, and feel the pulse to know what illness a person is suffering from, and how to treat it. Western medicine needs to open up a person's body to treat some internal diseases. But Chinese medicine doesn't need to open up a person's body to treat the patient's illness. So, comparing the two, which is better?" At this time, everyone saw that Li Yundong had answered the continuous questions quickly, with a quick mind, sharp words, and exquisite metaphors. They couldn't help but secretly applaud Li Yundong. In particular, Li Yundong pointed out the shortcomings of Western medicine. Every time he pointed out it was bloody and unbearable. No one had a deeper understanding of this than them. Chinese people were against traditional Chinese medicine, and Westerners were also against Western medicine. Mandelson wrote a book to denounce Western medicine. After that, the Americans also established the National Health Alliance, putting forward the view that an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of treatment. However, they did not find a more advantageous weapon and tool to replace Western medicine, so for a time, they were like lost lambs, hesitating and at a loss. At this time, Li Yundong's eloquent speech suddenly made their eyes light up. It was as if the clouds in their hearts had been dispelled, and for a moment, almost everyone seemed to have understood something. At this time, Lin Guoying couldn't help but smile and applaud Li Yundong's demeanor as a speaker. As soon as she took the lead, Chris and her family next to her also applauded. Su Chan and Zi Yuan looked at each other and smiled, then gently clapped their hands together. The other guests in the hall had never heard such a wonderful theory, especially Li Yundong's metaphor about Western medicine and traditional Chinese medicine. It not only pointed out the advantages of Chinese and Western medicine, but also described the characteristics of Chinese and Western medicine very well, which was refreshing and made their eyes light up. Westerners were relatively honest. At this time, they were impressed by Li Yundong's words and demeanor, and they couldn't help applauding and cheering. Although Lisa was still a little unconvinced, she couldn't help but applaud Li Yundong's speech. It was not the first time that Li Yundong had faced such a scene. In the thunderous applause, he smiled slightly. His smile was gentle and calm. He raised the wine glass in his hand and said very gracefully, "For health, let's drink this glass." Chris looked at Li Yundong with her eyes shining. After translating his words loudly, there was a chorus of agreement in the hall. Everyone raised the wine glasses in their hands and shouted, "For health, let's drink this glass." For a moment, the hall was brightly lit, and people toasted each other. Lisa's difficulties had become Li Yundong's speech. At this time, he had completely become the center and the protagonist of the banquet. Everyone's light was shrouded by him. People at the banquet rushed to talk to him and ask about some information about traditional Chinese medicine. More people wanted to seek medical advice, hoping that Li Yundong could cure their diseases. Li Yundong talked with everyone politely and reservedly, neither servile nor overbearing. Chris, the daughter of the family, was also willing to act as a mouthpiece and interpreter. When the banquet was about to end and everyone was about to leave, Lin Guoying walked up to Li Yundong and said with a smile, "Zhenren Li, it was a very wonderful speech. I didn't expect that you would not only be a great cultivator at such a young age, but also an excellent speaker. You're really amazing." Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "All talk and no practice are fake. All practice and no practice are stubborn. Chinese people speak too little in the world, so they don't understand us. That's why our traditional Chinese medicine is misunderstood like this. I just happened to be at the right time today." At this time, Lin Guoying's expression changed and she asked seriously, "Zhenren Li, have you ever thought about introducing traditional Chinese medicine to the United States and letting Americans come to see traditional Chinese medicine?" Well, I had diarrhea from yesterday until today, and I almost fainted. I've been writing with illness for the past 2 days, and it's been very painful. In addition, I hardly read the book review section recently. Some readers pointed out that Chris's spirit had a problem. This was indeed my negligence. I apologize to the readers and will correct it later. Some readers were so excited that they asked me for an explanation and scolded me in the book review section. I don't think it's necessary. It's just reading a book. Why do you have to be so serious? I'm not the Ministry of Railways. Why do you ask me for an explanation? What do I owe you? Why are you so excited? In addition, some readers often leave messages for me on Xueqi, blaming me for ignoring them. Tang, let me explain here. There are too many readers who leave messages for me every day, and I really can't take care of them all. In the future, if there are readers who want to talk to me about something, please just say it. Don't say "Are you there?" or "Tang, are you there?" Usually, when I see such similar words, I definitely won't reply. I don't have that much time. On the contrary, many people who come up to talk to me directly, I often reply. Please forgive me. Finally, today is the first birthday of raising a vixen at home. Thank you for your company and support over the past year. Thank you for your encouragement. Chapter 776. Lin Guiying's words stunned Li Yundong. He thought about it carefully and said, Senior Lin, I wish everyone in the world could speak Chinese and believe in traditional Chinese medicine. However, I believe you also know that the huge cultural gap between the East and the West can't be eliminated in a day or two. Moreover, if you want to promote traditional Chinese medicine in the United States, you can't do it without a huge amount of manpower and material resources. As he said this, he looked at Lin Guiying and smiled sincerely. I know that your family is very rich, but your money doesn't come from nowhere. It's earned through hard work. Promoting traditional Chinese medicine in the United States may be a thankless task. I don't want you to spend all your money on this thing that is likely to fail. Lin Guiying looked at Li Yundong in surprise. She had thought that the young man in front of her would be overjoyed and take the opportunity to persuade her to invest a lot of money to help him achieve such a career. If such a thing could be done, Li Yundong would definitely be recorded in history. He would become the object of admiration for countless people. As the saying goes, medicine carries the Tao, and martial arts defend the Tao. If he wanted to make the world revere him, he had to rely on martial arts. But if he wanted to make the world admire him and sing his praises, he had to rely on the power of medicine. Lin Guiying and her husband had started from scratch and taken the lead in building the current country. She had seen all the vicissitudes of life, so she naturally knew that everything in the world was nothing more than fame and fortune. Some people sought profit, so there was a saying that all the people in the world came for profit. Some people sought fame, so there was a saying that people wanted to please the public and fish for fame. As long as the thing that Lin Guiying mentioned was done, he would definitely gain both fame and fortune. Who in the world wouldn't be tempted? However, not only did Li Yundong not show the slightest desire for quick success, but he also stood in Lin Guiying's position and sincerely persuaded her. This made Lin Guiying think more highly of Li Yundong. The elder, who had lived for 70 or 80 years, looked at Li Yundong with a moved expression. She seemed to want to see the slightest hypocrisy and politeness in Li Yundong's face and eyes. She had been wandering all her life and had seen countless things and people. She had long developed a pair of extremely sharp eyes. She was confident that she could see through a person's inner qualities at a glance. But Lin Guiying looked at Li Yundong carefully, only to see sincerity in his eyes. She didn't see any impetuosity or utilitarianism. Lin Guiying let out a long sigh in her heart and thought, this is a gentleman who can entrust his life and death to me. As she was thinking, she couldn't help but glance at Chris. She sighed softly in her heart, feeling a little sorry for her granddaughter. Although Lin Guiying had been wandering abroad in her early years and spent most of her life abroad, she was still influenced by the traditional culture of China. She was very strict with her family and had always believed that wealth and honor could be passed down to the family for no more than 3 generations. Farming and reading could be passed down to the family for no more than 5 generations, poetry could be passed down to the family for no more than 7 generations, and morality could be passed down to the family for no more than 10 generations. The history of China had proved this point countless times. The once incomparably rich businessmen and rich people had long been submerged in the rolling mortal world of history. Even those who were good at farming and reading had been submerged in the changes of the historical dynasties. Only the families of Zhang Tianshi and Confucius, who were good at Tao and virtue, had been passed down to this day, forming a beautiful story of Zhang in the south and Confucius in the north. Li Yundong in front of her was a man who cultivated Tao and had virtue. Since ancient times, men who had Tao and virtue had been respected. A wise man could see the world from bits and pieces, and a prophet could know the autumn from the falling leaves. From such a small thing, Lin Guiying could see that Li Yundong was a gentleman who could entrust big things to her. She was in awe and made up her mind to let her granddaughter follow Li Yundong. At the same time, she would do her best to help his career. However, although Lin Guiying was respectful in her heart, there was no difference on her face. She just laughed and said, "Zhenren Li, you worry too much. I have been in the United States for so many years, so I have some understanding of the current situation here. In the early years, the medical industry in the United States could be said to be controlled and monopolized by pharmaceutical companies. These drugs were the cash cows of the world's richest people. Even their wealth could be compared with that of oil tycoons." Li Yundong nodded. In addition to robbery, there was also selling medicine. It can be seen that selling medicine is really one of the most profitable businesses in the world. Lin Guiying smiled slightly and said, "Yes, at that time, the entire medical system in the United States was linked to politics and laws. If a patient was unwilling to accept their treatment, the local court would immediately intervene and enforce it. I remember that there used to be a chemical called Ritalin. It was advertised that it could help school children learn and make them excellent in both character and study. Therefore, some local governments determined that any school child who wanted to take this medicine had to take it. If they didn't take it, they would not be allowed to go to school. If the parents came forward to negotiate, the parents would be prosecuted, sentenced, fined, and put in jail." As she said this, Lin Guiying sighed softly. At that time, 60% of American students took this medicine. I don't know if it was useful or not, but its side effects were to make students depressed, decadent, and in serious cases, even commit suicide. Some people simply became very hot-tempered and stabbed themselves, killing their parents, grandparents, classmates, teachers, and principals. According to the figures released by the state, there were at least 150,000 Americans who were disabled or killed because of taking this chemical every year. Now that I think about it, it was really an unbearable memory. It was also because of this that I asked my child to withdraw from the public school system and go to a private school. Later, this kind of thing aroused the anger of American citizens. As you said, the book Confessions of a Medical Rebel, written by Mandelson, caused a sensation after it was published in the United States 80 years ago. Americans began to reflect deeply and set up the National Health Alliance. Although such a phenomenon has disappeared now, Americans are more and more aware that their own Western medicine is actually not a life-saving cure. They are eager for a truly green, natural, environmentally friendly, and harmless medical method that can keep them away from diseases and keep them healthy and live a long life. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He said, "Senior Lin, do you mean, now is the best time to introduce traditional Chinese medicine to the United States?" Lin Guiying laughed. "Zhenren Li, although Americans advocate science and have always despised traditional Chinese medicine, in fact, traditional Chinese medicine has been introduced to the United States for a long time. When Nixon visited China, he had received acupuncture in China. After returning to China, he praised it greatly. After that, many political celebrities received acupuncture treatment in Chinatown. As a result, the diseases that had not been cured for many years were immediately cured, and those who were paralyzed could stand up and walk. These things immediately caused a wave of acupuncture in the United States. Later, the United States legalized the practice of acupuncture. Gradually, the American medical community gradually opened up and adopted a non-interference policy, allowing patients to choose their own way of seeing a doctor. Li Yundong was surprised. There's such a thing? So traditional Chinese medicine should be doing well in the United States now? Lin Guiying shook her head and said, although there are about 20,000 practitioners in the United States who are engaged in acupuncture treatment, traditional Chinese medicine is not only about acupuncture. Acupuncture can't cure all diseases. More Americans use acupuncture just for curiosity, not because they trust traditional Chinese medicine. We still have a long way to go. Li Yundong pondered for a while, then looked up and said, Senior Lin, do you mean that Americans just lack such an opportunity and place to get to know real traditional Chinese medicine? In fact, The environment for traditional Chinese medicine to enter the United States is ripe, right? Lin Guiying smiled and said, yes. Now Americans are in urgent need of a green treatment method, and traditional Chinese medicine is very suitable for their needs. As long as you are willing to do this, I am willing to do my best to help you. While Li Yunyang and Lin Guiying were talking, Chris, Su Chan, and Zi Yuan were listening quietly. They didn't dare to breathe too loudly. They knew that this might be something that could change the world, and it was such a thing that they could witness and even participate in the future. Li Yundong pursed his lips tightly and frowned unconsciously. After a long time, he raised his head and said to Lin Guiying, Senior Lin, this matter is too big. I can't give you an answer now. I have to go back and think about it. Lin Guiying was not disappointed at all. She knew that if Li Yundong agreed rashly, she would be worried. At this time, careful consideration was a sign of maturity. Lin Guiying smiled and said, It's okay. As long as I'm alive, my promise is valid. Even if I'm gone one day, I will ask my children to help you as much as possible. Li Yundong laughed and said, Senior Lin, you can live for at least another 50 years. Lin Guiying blinked and said the name of a song quite wittily, 50 years is not enough. I really want to live for another 500 years. These words made everyone burst into laughter, and the banquet ended in a joyous manner. After the banquet, Li Yundong took Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Chris on their way back. Because Chris was a Yin spirit, she didn't have any documents with her, so it was naturally impossible for her to take a plane. Zi Yuan, Su Chan, and Li Yundong were all unregistered residents, so they definitely didn't have passports. Therefore, they could only fly back to Tiannan City. Fortunately, Li Yundong had helped Zi Yuan and Su Chan along the way with his unparalleled zhenqi. Otherwise, with the strength of their zhenqi, they would definitely be exhausted to the point of vomiting blood when they flew back to China. When they finally got home, it was already the evening of the next day. They returned home, travel-worn. At this time, Zhou Qin was still in seclusion, and the little foxes had not returned from the tea shop of Desangxian. The house was empty and extremely quiet. After Chris's Yin spirit returned to her body, she fell on the sand tiredly. Her eyes were wide open, and she looked up at the ceiling. No one knew what she was thinking. In order not to disturb Zhou Qin, Li Yundong turned around and entered Zi Yuan's room. Su Chan loved cleanliness. As soon as she got home, she went into the bathroom and took a bath happily. At this time, Zi Yuan saw that there was no one around, so she pulled Li Yundong aside and whispered, Li Yundong, are you going to accept Senior Lin's proposal? Li Yundong thought for a moment and sighed softly. This game is too big. I'm afraid that Senior Lin can't handle it alone. This requires a huge amount of manpower and material resources. It's definitely not enough with just the few of us. Zi Yuan nodded secretly. She had thought more deeply than Li Yundong. In her opinion, even if Lin Guiying's family could handle the whole thing, it would still be inappropriate. Because in that case, Lin Guiying's family would occupy a great position in the future when Li Yundong built up the country, and they might even take the initiative. Although this idea was a little harsh, Lin Guiying could help Li Yundong wholeheartedly and selflessly. Chris could do the same, but who could guarantee that the rest of the family would think the same? Who could guarantee that they would not be tempted after the huge benefits of this matter were shown? Zi Yuan advised softly, Li Yundong, you have to think about accepting a few special disciples. In the cultivation world, which great Jinren or martial artist doesn't accept famous and rich people as their disciples? Only when there are many disciples can you cultivate and preach. Li Yundong nodded secretly and agreed with Zi Yuan's words very much in his heart. He glanced at Zi Yuan and saw her concerned look, as if she was a virtuous wife earnestly telling her husband. His heart skipped a beat, and he couldn't help but look at Zi Yuan with a different expression. Zi Yuan seemed to notice Li Yundong's strange gaze. Her cheeks turned slightly red and she turned her head shyly. Just as she was about to get up and leave, she heard a knock on the door. Zi Yuan immediately turned around and walked quickly to the door. When she opened it, she saw a slim and graceful girl standing opposite her. Her back was facing her, and she was looking at the opposite door. Zi Yuan asked curiously, "Who are you looking for?" As soon as the girl turned around, Zi Yuan immediately recognized her. It was the daughter of the Shen family, Shen Hui. "Shen Hui? What can I do for you?" Zi Yuan asked. Shen Hui's face was no longer as lively and shrewd as before. Her face was full of melancholy. She crossed her hands in front of her and pinched her fingers together. She lowered her head, turned around, and said in a low voice, "Sister Ziyuanj. Li Yun. Is Immortal Li at home?" Chapter 777. Immortal Li? Hearing Shen Hui's words, Ziyuan couldn't help but smile. She turned her face to look at Li Yundong in the room and said with a teasing smile, "Immortal Li, someone is looking for you." Li Yundong walked out and saw that it was Shen Hui. He smiled and said, "It's you. Come in and sit down." Shen Hui stood at the door with her hands clasped together. She lowered her head and hesitated for a while before raising it. She said anxiously and earnestly, "Immortal Li, can I ask you for a favor?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "What's the matter? Come in and talk. Besides, what can you ask me for?" Shan Hui knew that she had made things difficult for Li Yundong again and again, so it was naturally impossible for him to have a good impression of her. She bit her lip, and tears kept rolling in her eyes. She begged in a low voice, "Immortal Li, I know you hate me, but for the sake of human life, please let bygones be bygones and help me." As she said this, she bent her knees and was about to kneel on the ground. Li Yundong quickly held her up, frowned secretly, and said very seriously, "First of all, you can call me Li Yundong, but don't call me Immortal Li. I'm just an ordinary person, not an immortal. Secondly, if you don't tell me what it is, how can I help you? Thirdly, what happened before was just a misunderstanding. There is no unresolvable grudge between me and you. Let bygones be bygones. Finally, your father Chen Wankai and I can be considered friends despite the difference in age. I am indebted to him for looking up to me and taking care of me in some matters. Even if it is for his sake, I will still help as much as I can. Get up quickly. What era is this? Why are you kneeling so easily? Really, who would believe that you are the daughter of the Shen family?" Shan Hui wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes and got up with the help of Li Yundong. She originally had a baby face, and her appearance was pretty and delicate. Although she was petite, her figure was very hot. It could be said that she had an angel's face and a devil's figure. She looked like a pear blossom in tears. Even Zi Yuan, who was beside her, couldn't help but come forward to comfort her softly and persuade her with kind words, not to mention Li Yundong, who had always had tender and protective feelings for women. After Li Yundong asked Shan Hui to sit down on the sofa in the living room, he took a serious look at the girl in front of him. He couldn't help but associate the timid and sad girl in front of him with the shrewd girl he had met in the clothing store for the first time. The two images were so different that Li Yundong couldn't help but shake his head secretly. He thought to himself, "It's really fate. Who would have thought that the daughter of the Shen family in front of me is the shrewd little girl who scolded people indiscriminately?" Li Yundong saw that after Shan Hui sat down on the sand, she just secretly shed tears, but never spoke. He knew that the girl was reserved after all and might be embarrassed to open her mouth, so he took the initiative to say, "Shan Hui, why did you come to me? Is someone sick?" When Shan Hui heard this, she immediately raised her head and nodded gently. Li Yundong was stunned. He thought for a moment and said, "Your father Shen Wankai? No way. He took the medicine I gave him, so he should be in good health." Shan Hui shook her head bitterly. "It's not my father." Li Yundong nodded slightly. "That's right. If he took my medicine and got sick, then someone must have done something to him behind his back. It's not a trivial matter." Shan Hui's body trembled slightly, and her fingers clenched together tighter. Li Yundong asked again, "Is that your mother?" In Li Yundong's opinion, Shan Hui must have knelt down and begged him because her close family was seriously ill and helpless, so she came to him. But to Li Yundong's surprise, Shan Hui shook her head and said, "No, it's Auntie Li, Auntie Li." Li Yundong asked curiously, "Which Auntie Li?" Shan Hui raised her head and looked at Li Yundong timidly, as if she was afraid that he would be angry. She stammered, "It's Shen Yu's mother." "Shen Yu?" When Li Yundong heard the name, he frowned and asked in confusion, "Oh, you mean Mrs. Li? Why is she seriously ill?" Shan Hui said hesitantly, "After Shen Yu was kicked out of the house by the old master, I don't know where he went. Auntie Li misses him day and night and doesn't want to eat or drink. Now, she's dying." Li Yundong looked at Shen Hui strangely and subconsciously wanted to ask, hasn't this Auntie Li always been against you? If she's gone, wouldn't it be more convenient for you to take over Shen Wansai's property? But this question was too heart-wrenching. He could only think about it, not say it. But Shen Hui was also the daughter of a rich family, and she had lived in an environment of intrigue since she was a child. Li Yundong just glanced at her strangely, and she understood what he was thinking. Shen Hui explained in a low voice, I know you will find it strange. Why did I ask you to save Auntie Li? My mother also told me not to save her, but I watched such a beautiful person, such a charming woman, lose weight bit by bit in front of my eyes, die bit by bit. I really couldn't stand it. As she spoke, Shen Hui's fingers were tightly twisted together. She raised her head, and her big eyes were full of tears. She choked and said, I'm so scared, I'm really scared. I've never felt that this family is so cold and cruel as I do now. My father cut off my brother and his son. My mother gritted her teeth and cursed Auntie Li behind her back. Even my father didn't let me find a doctor to treat her. I don't know. I really don't know why our family has such a deep hatred. Why do we want to kill each other? Why is it like this? At this point, Shen Hui couldn't help but burst into tears. I know, Li Yundong, it's my brother, Shen Yu, who let you down, but the old master has already cut off one of his hands. Can this be considered as writing off the grudge? I really can't stand it. Although Auntie Li doesn't usually treat me well, I see such a big family, and now everyone wants her to die. I'm scared, I'm so scared. I'm afraid that one day, I'll end up like her, lying on the bed alone, waiting to die, and no one outside wants to save me. Everyone is looking forward to my death. Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, let out a long sigh. She couldn't help but gently hold her in her arms and comfort her in a low voice. Li Yundong's face was as dark as water, and he was silent. After a long time, he got up and sighed. Good luck, it's really good luck. Before I started cultivating, I stayed at home all day, hating and envying those rich second generations. Now it seems that I know how terrible the ways of the world are in a big rich family. Li Yundong shook his head and said, although Shen Yu is a scumbag, his family should not be harmed. I didn't expect that his mother would end up like this. I have some responsibility. But don't worry, I will definitely save her. Shen Hui was overjoyed. She looked at Li Yundong with tears in her eyes and said in a trembling voice, Are you willing to save her? Even my father refused to let her go. Are you willing to let her go? Li Yundong sighed and said, There is no hatred in the world that can't be solved. Why wouldn't I save her? I don't know what old Master Shen is thinking. How could he implicate Shen Yu's mother? After Shen Hui had experienced a series of great changes in her family, her original arrogant and domineering temperament had also been restrained a lot. She had become cautious and introverted. Although she was dissatisfied with her father, she still understood the truth that a son should not talk about his father. She quickly wiped her tears and said in a choked voice, Then when are we going? Li Yundong said, Saving people is like putting out a fire. We can't delay for even a second. Let's go now. As he said this, Li Yundong nodded to Zi Yuan. Zi Yuan, your medical skills are also very good. Come with me. Zi Yuan nodded slightly. She hesitated for a moment and asked softly, Should we call Su Chan? If there is any grudge, we can resolve it in person. Li Yundong thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, Forget it. She is still taking a bath. This matter can't be delayed. Maybe if we go a step earlier, we can save a life. If we go a step later, we will be helpless. Zi Yuan knew that this was just an excuse. With Li Yundong's ability, even if a person had just died, he could still save this person and bring her back to life for a while. He just didn't want Su Chan to be embarrassed when she arrived at the Shen family. Zi Yuan nodded and stopped talking about this matter. She turned around and went out with Li Yundong. When the three of them walked to the stairwell, Li Yundong suddenly stopped and said to Zi Yuan, By the way, call Chris. It's time for her to start learning about cultivation. Zi Yuan smiled slightly and turned to enter Li Yundong's room. Not long after, Chris rushed out from inside, biting a card in her mouth. Her hands were behind her, and she was busy coiling up her wet golden hair. Li Yundong smiled and walked over to take her hands down. He gently brushed his palm over her head and said with a smile, "You don't need to coil it up. Let's go." Chris touched her back, only to find that her wet hair was now dry as usual. She was secretly speechless and didn't dare to ask more. She draped her long golden hair over her shoulders like a waterfall and obediently followed behind Li Yundong. She glanced at Shen Hui and greeted her politely. Shen Hui secretly glanced at Chris. She didn't understand why Li Yundong wanted to take a blonde girl to her home, but she didn't dare to say much. She just quietly led the way. When the group of people arrived at the Shen family's villa by car, it was already about 8 o'clock in the evening. Logically speaking, this time should be the time when all the households were brightly lit and the most lively and warm. However, at this time, the Shen family's house was dark, and there was a dead silence all around. It was a sharp contrast with the last time Li Yundong and the others had come to the Shen family's house. Li Yundong only took a glance and shook his head in his heart. After they followed Shen Hui into the villa, they found that the hall was also dark. After Shen Hui turned on the light, the housekeeper came out. "Who is it?" After the housekeeper asked, he was surprised to find that Li Yundong and the others were behind Shen Hui. He opened his mouth and said, "Shall we you?" Shen Hui made a silent gesture to him and said in a low voice, "Uncle Zhang, don't talk. I'll take Immortal Li and Immortal Zi Yuan to see Auntie Li." A strange look flashed across Butler Zhang's eyes. He retreated to the side and didn't say anything. Li Yundong followed Shen Hui upstairs and came to the innermost small room. After pushing the door open, Li Yundong took a look inside and was immediately shocked. Chapter 778. When Li Yundong first saw Shen Yu's mother, Li Shaoxian, it was in the reception hall of the Longmen building in Donggu City. At that time, Li Shaoxian was dressed in luxurious fur and jewelry. Although the child was in her 20s, she looked no different from a young girl in her 20s. She could be called a beautiful woman with outstanding temperament and outstanding beauty. No wonder Shen Wankai doted on her so much. But at this time, in front of Li Yunyang, Li Shaoxian was lying on the bed. Her black hair had become dry and pale, and her skin, which was as delicate as a young girl, was full of wrinkles. Her watery eyes were also deeply sunken at this time, leaving only 2 empty eyeballs embedded in them. She was motionless, as if she had died. If Li Yundong hadn't found that she was still breathing slightly, he would have thought that this once beautiful woman had died. At this time, Li Shaoxian was like a living mummy. Her appearance was like a skeleton, which made people feel terrified and creepy. Although Li Yundong didn't like this woman very much, he couldn't bear to see her like this at this time. He sighed softly. He turned his head and whispered to Shen Hui, "How did she become like this?" Shen Hui sighed softly and said, "After Shen Yu was driven out of the house by the old master that day, Auntie Li sent someone to look for his whereabouts in private, but they couldn't find him. Auntie Li was heartbroken. She missed her son every day and didn't eat anything. Now she has slowly become like this." Li Yundong frowned and said, "She doesn't eat. You can inject her with glucose and give her liquid food. Isn't this letting her die on her own?" Shen Hui sighed and said at first, the housekeeper Uncle Zhang thought so too, but when he wanted to help Auntie Li hit him like crazy and said that if he did this again, she would commit suicide. Uncle Zhang was afraid that she would commit suicide, so he had to let her go on like this. Li Yundong frowned again and asked, "What about Mr. Shen? He doesn't care?" Although Mrs. Li doesn't have a title, she has shared the same bed with him for 20 years. Is he so heartless? Shen Hui glanced at Li Yundong and said hesitantly, "No, it's not like that. It's. Li Yundong asked, "Is it because Mr. Shen blames Li Shaoxian for not teaching Shen Yu well?" Shen Hui hesitated for a moment and nodded, but soon shook her head. Li Yundong frowned and was unhappy in his heart. He wanted to ask again, but at this time, he heard a low laugh behind him. It was Chen Wankai who had heard the news and rushed over. "Young Master Li and Fairy Zi Yuan are here. Why didn't you inform me in advance? I could have gone out to welcome you." When Chen Wankai appeared at the door, his face was full of smiles, but his eyebrows were full of melancholy. His white hair was trembling, as if he had aged more than 10 years. Seeing him like this, the dissatisfaction in Li Yundong's heart weakened a little. He sighed secretly, smiled slightly, and said to Shen Wankai, "Mr. Shen, You are still so polite. Chen Wankai looked around quickly. When he saw Shen Hui, who was lowering her head timidly, and Li Shaoxian, who was behind her, he frowned secretly, but soon his brows relaxed again. He asked knowingly, "What's the matter with young Master Li and Fairy Zi Yuan today?" Li Yundong looked at Shen Hui, who had lowered her head and was silent. He went straight to the point and said concisely, "Shen Hui asked me to treat Mrs. Li." Chen Wankai glanced at Shen Hui, and a meaningful look flashed in his eyes. Before he could speak, Aunt Zhang, who was beside him, suddenly opened her mouth and scolded in a low voice, "Shen Hui, what are you doing? Come here." The third concubine, Aunt Zhang, had been fighting with Li Shaoxian for more than 10 years, and now the winner had finally been decided. Not only had she seen Li Shaoxian lose Shen Wancai's strongest weapon in the incident of Shen Yu, but she had also pointed out that Li Shaoxian had poured out all of Shen Wancai's medicine in an attempt to kill Shen Wancai. It was also because of this matter that Chen Wancai was furious, and it became the last straw that completely crushed Li Shaoxian. Her third brother had finally defeated her fourth brother, and the east wind had finally overwhelmed the west wind. These days, the third concubine could be said to be proud and proud. Not only did she form a sharp contrast with Li Shaoxian, who was as thin as a match, but even when standing next to Chen Wankai, who was more than 10 years older, her face was still flushed. Shen Hui lowered her head and slowly moved to Aunt Zheng. As soon as she approached, her mother scolded, "You unfilial thing. You know that the old master hates this bitch to the bone, but you still saved her. Do you want to anger the old master to death?" As she said this, she raised her hand and slapped Shen Hui in the face. Li Yundong was furious in his heart. He raised his hand and grabbed the arm of the third concubine. He said in a deep voice, "Mrs. Zheng, if you have something to say, let's talk about it. Why did you hit me?" Although the third concubine was unhappy, she thought, "I discipline my daughter. What does it have to do with you?" But she also knew that the boy in front of her was no small matter. If it weren't for him, the Shen family would never have become like this, and she would never have been able to defeat Li Shaoxian. The third concubine quickly smiled and said, "Young Master Li, you don't know. Our Shen Yu used to be too lax in discipline, so now he has become like this. Although I am not Shen Yu's biological mother, I am also very sad that such a thing has happened to my family. You tell me, if I don't discipline my daughter strictly, how can I do it? Beating is a sign of love, and scolding is a sign of love. Only now do I understand this sentence. If I had understood it earlier and told Shaoxian earlier, I don't think Shen Yu would have embarked on such a road of no return. Alas, it's all my fault." As she spoke, she couldn't help but raise her hand to wipe her wet eyes. Shen Hui, who was standing to one side, also cried. She grabbed her hand and cried in a low voice, "Mom, I will be obedient. Don't worry, I will be filial to you." Li Yundong saw that her words were reasonable, but after thinking about it carefully, almost every word was directed at Li Shaoxian. She was pointing at the mulberry tree, scolding the locust tree, and adding insult to injury. Li Yundong looked at her meaningfully. He was secretly unhappy, but he also knew that it was difficult for an upright official to settle a family feud. He didn't want to get involved in the Shen family's affairs. Li Yundong just nodded to Shen Wankai and asked, "Mr. Shen, Mrs. Li has become like this today, and it has something to do with me. Although she is also at fault, it is not as bad as death. I want to give her another chance. What do you think?" Shen Wankai sighed deeply. He said to Li Yundong, "Young Master Li, can I have a word with you?" Li Yundong nodded and followed Shen Wankai to a nearby study. As soon as he entered the door, Shen Wankai said in a deep voice, "Young Master Li, you must be blaming me in your heart, saying that I am unreasonable and mean, right?" Li Yundong had always been an open and above-board person. He did not refute it, but nodded straightforwardly and said, "Yes. After all, she is the person who has lived with you for more than 20 years. Shen Wankai smiled bitterly, reached out his hand, and motioned for Li Yundong to sit down. He slowly sat down, leaned tiredly against the back of the chair, and said wearily, "Young Master Li, to tell you the truth, when you saved me, I knew what Shaoxian had done. If you hadn't saved me at that time, I'm afraid I would have been killed by her. But at that time, for the sake of her hard work bringing up Shen Yu, I thought, everyone makes mistakes. As long as I know my mistakes and can change them, I will pretend that I have never been born. But, you know what happened next? Rome wasn't built in a day. Speaking of which, Xiaoxian and I both have an unshirkable responsibility for you becoming such a cruel and arrogant person. Shen Wankai said slowly. Of course, this is not the reason why I want to force Xiaoxian to die. It's because Xiaoxian hates me in her heart. She just wants to die in front of me, make me regret it for the rest of my life, and make me unable to live in peace for the rest of my life. Li Yundong frowned and said, But I heard from Shen Hui that you didn't ask someone to find a doctor for Mrs. Li? Shen Wankai laughed. He raised his head and looked at Li Yundong meaningfully. Young Master Li, you saw what my third brother said just now. Hey, there's a hidden meaning in his words. Before one wave had subsided, another wave had arisen. Young Master Li, think about it from my point of view. I only have Hui'er left to inherit the family business, and she has such a scheming mother. If I pass the family business to her, when I really get old or I'm gone, will she do something unbearable under her mother's instigation? Li Yundong was stunned for a moment, and then suddenly realized something. So, are you testing Shen Hui? Shen Wankai nodded heavily. Yes. If she can really make up her mind not to save Xiaoxian, then I would rather give my family business to charity in the future than pass it on to her. Li Yundong sighed. This family of yours. It's really difficult. Shen Wankai smiled bitterly. That's why I have the idea of seeking Taoge. Young Master Li, I know that you are a master of Tao, and I am so devout about Tao. Why are you not willing to accept me as a disciple? Is it because you still hate Su Chan in your heart? Li Yundong shook his head. No, this matter is over. The reason why I don't accept you as a disciple is because you haven't answered me. Why on earth do you cultivate Tao? At this time, Shen Wankai stood up and knelt on the ground. He said, Young Master Li, I heard that Lu En, the king of Huainan in the Western Han dynasty, was devoted to Tao. One day, he heard that there was an immortal named Duke Ba who had the secret recipe for refining elixirs of immortality, but he never passed it on to others, so he went to find Duke Ba. Unexpectedly, Duke Ba wandered around, and Luan suffered a lot but still failed to find him. But Luan still searched wholeheartedly, and finally, Duke Ba was moved by Luan's sincerity. One day, Duke Ba came to Luan's house and taught him the method of refining elixirs of immortality. He also told Luan that once the elixir of immortality was refined, he would be able to ascend to heaven and become an immortal after eating it. Luan devoutly cultivated every day, and later, he really refined the elixir of immortality. After he took the elixir of immortality, his chickens and dogs ate the dregs of the elixir and also ascended to immortality along with Luan. Shen Wansai's white hair trembled slightly. He said excitedly, Young Master Li, when I first met you, I knew that you were not an ordinary person, and that you would definitely have a great career in the future. Later, I found out that young Master Li is a genius of the world with the skills of immortals. I, Shen Wankai, know that my fortune is shallow, and I do not seek to cultivate amazing magic, nor do I seek to become a famous master in the world. I only seek to live a long life. Young Master Li, you ask me why I cultivate Tao, and my answer is. As he said this, he kowtowed deeply. I only wish to be a chicken or dog that ascends to heaven. Group 5 is full. Everyone, don't add any more. Group 6 is now open. 94450337. Chapter 779. Chen Wankai wholeheartedly pursued the Tao, but his mind was not pure. Although he only wanted to live a long life, in fact, Li Yundong knew very well that he was reluctant to give up the glory and wealth of the world and wanted to enjoy it for a few more years. Since ancient times, no matter how the dynasties changed and the times changed, those who believed in God and Buddha and longed for longevity were always the rich and powerful. Who would be willing to give up the luxurious life in the world? Many emperors of all dynasties longed for immortality because they were not willing to hold supreme power in their hands. However, they still had to live, grow old, get sick and die like ordinary people. If it was an ordinary person who lived a bitter life, who would desire immortality and suffering? However, those who lived a little more comfortable life longed to live 100 years. The higher the official, the more money they had, the more they hoped that they would not die. This was also the reason why Taoist Li Yi held a health class in society, and it immediately attracted countless rich people to join it. In theory, there was no difference between Chen Wankai and these people. However, the person he was pursuing was Li Yundong, a rising star who was famous in the cultivation world but unknown in society. The other rich people were pursuing Li Yi, who only knew how to cheat money and women. Li Yundong had always set a standard, that was, his disciples must wholeheartedly pursue the Tao. This Tao must be a devout belief in Taoism and have no distracting thoughts in their hearts. Only in this way could they achieve positive results. In other words, Li Yundong hoped that his disciples would all be great figures in the future, so that he would not lose face. However, gradually, under the influence of Zi Yuan, Li Yundong also knew that it was almost impossible to achieve this. Everyone had their own selfish feelings. Those who had no selfishness were saints. Since they were saints, they could write books and establish their own sections. Why should they cultivate with him? As the saying goes, if a person is too scrupulous, there will be no disciples, and if the water is too clear, there will be no fish. Li Yundong also realized that if he always insisted on this point of view, he was afraid that he could only accept Xueqi as his disciple in this life. Although Xueqi's talent and opportunity were not inferior to his, he only had one disciple. If he established a sect in the future, he would be laughed at by others. Li Yundong understood this, so he no longer forced the other party to reveal his desire to seek the Tao. As long as the other party was not a wicked person, had a good heart, had opportunities, and had talent, then he could consider it. It was not the first time that Shan Wankai had made such a big bow in front of Li Yundong. Moreover, he was dozens of years older than Li Yundong. Li Yundong was really a little embarrassed to be begged and kowtowed by a man of his father's generation. He reached out to help Shen Wankai up and said, "Mr. Shen, please get up first." Chen Wankai shook his head stubbornly. "Young Master Li, if you don't agree, I won't get up today." Li Yundong hadn't expected that the boss of a group would be so shameless. He couldn't help laughing and said, "Mr. Shen, how can you cultivate with me if you kneel on the ground?" Chen Wankai raised his head in surprise, and his voice trembled with ecstasy. "Young Master Li, you agree?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Mr. Shen, I am not an unreasonable person. Since you have said so, I have no reason to disagree. However, although I promise you, I can only accept you as a nominal disciple for now, just like Chris." Chris? Chen Wankai was slightly stunned, but then he reacted. "Is it the foreigner who came with you, young Master Li?" Li Yundong nodded. "That's right." Chen Wankai stood up with Li Yundong's help. He smiled cautiously and said, "Li, Master, has your disciple been sent abroad? She's really amazing." Li Yundong smiled and said, "She is also a fated person, and part of her blood is Chinese. You can talk to her in private. Her Chinese language is very good. Let's not talk about it now. Let's go save Li Shaoxian first." Chen Wankai nodded and sighed softly. "If a person has the intention to commit suicide, I'm afraid that even if you are a real immortal, you can only save her for a while, not for a lifetime." Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "That's better than not saving her." Chen Wankai sighed and said, "Master, you are really kind. Nowadays, people only care about their own interests. They don't care about the lives of others. What's more, Shaoxian has more or less offended you in the past." Li Yundong waved his hand and said, "Don't mention it." With that, he turned around and went out of the door, returning to Li Shaoxian's room. Although Chen Wankai was the emperor of his family and company, he carefully adjusted his role in front of Li Yundong. He followed Li Yundong step by step, neither too far behind nor too far ahead. After entering the room, Chen Wankai saw Chris standing quietly to the side. He stepped forward and bowed slightly, saying with a smile, "Hello, Shajib." When Chris heard him, a figure of her father's generation, call her Xueqi, she also felt strange in her heart. She replied with a strange expression, "Hello, hello." The two of them, who were quite different in age, greeted each other and turned to look at Li Yundong. At this time, Li Yundong walked up to Li Shaoxian and reached out to feel her pulse. As soon as his hand touched Li Shaoxian's skin, Li Shaoxian's whole body trembled. Then, her two deeply sunken eyeballs moved abruptly, as if a dead person had come back to life. Her originally empty eyes also had a strange color in an instant. She raised her trembling hand and pointed at Li Yundong, struggling to say, I don't want to see you. Get out." Shen Hui, who was standing to one side, couldn't help but say anxiously, "Auntie Li Liel. Young Master is here to save you." Li Shaoxian hadn't eaten for many days and had long been starving. At this time, she spoke weakly and her voice was light. I don't want him to save me. Go. All of you go. Let me die. Don't you all want me to die? Shan Hui was in a hurry to say more, but her mother, who was beside her, was secretly anxious. She was a little disappointed and scolded in her heart. Is this girl crazy today? Why does she always do bad things with good intentions? I don't know how this little tch used to make things difficult for us. Do you still want to save her? Have you heard of the story of the farmer and the snake? But these words could only be thought in her heart, and she absolutely could not say it. The third concubine remained calm. She grabbed Shan Hui with one hand and pinched her hard, but she advised, fourth sister, don't take it too hard. As the saying goes, even ants want to live, let alone. Before she finished speaking, Li Shaoxian didn't know where she got the strength from, but she glared at her fiercely. The fourth concubine's eyes were originally sunken like a skeleton. When she glared at her, her eyeballs seemed to fall out. She looked extremely terrible, and the third concubine was so scared that she took a step back. No matter what, she couldn't say anything else. Li Shaoxian gasped violently, and her chest was like a bellows. She said breathlessly, get out of here. Don't say such hypocritical words here. The third concubine was furious. She subconsciously wanted to curse, but she swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. She turned her head and said to Shen Wankai in a sobbing tone, Old master, look this. Before she could finish her words, Shen Wankai looked at her coldly. That cold gaze only made the rest of her words freeze in her mouth, and she didn't dare to say them. Li Jiandong saw that their family did not forget to scheme against each other at this critical juncture. The women around Shen Wankai were really not easy to deal with. He couldn't help but think of Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others around him. He sighed in his heart, not only am I lucky in love, but I also have a personal disciple and a confidant. They are very considerate and never fight openly or secretly. Although the little girl sometimes causes a little trouble, she is simple, naive, and kind, and never gets involved in these things of jealousy. God is really kind to me. Li Jiandong sighed in his heart. He calmed down and said to Li Shaoxian, Mrs. Li, I know you have resentment in your heart, but did we cause all this? If a person makes a mistake, he must pay the price. This is the consequence, and there is a reason why a person can come to this point today. If you give up on yourself like this, you are simply avoiding your own mistakes and responsibilities. You can't find Shenyu now, but have you ever thought that if one day Shenyu suddenly learns from his mistakes and turns over a new leaf, but you have already given up on yourself and are no longer in the world? How do you expect him to face all this? Won't he go back to the crooked path? Li Jiandong said earnestly, Mrs. Li, you have worked hard to raise your child. I can understand your sadness and grief, but I don't think you want the child you raised to become an evil person in the future, do you? Don't you want your child to be looked at in the eye and praised by others one day? If you want to, cheer up first. I can save you for a while, but the only person who can save you for a lifetime will always be yourself. Listening to Li Jiandong's words, Li Shaoxian's eyes were full of tears. Her lips trembled slightly, and after a long time, she said in a trembling voice, Can I still see my Yuer? Li Jiandong said in a deep voice, That depends on whether you have a firm and persistent heart, Mrs. Li. Li Shaoxian choked with sobs and said, It's my fault. I didn't teach Yuer well. Immortal Li, I want to find my son and give him a chance to turn over a new leaf. I want to teach him well again. Please save me. Li Jiandong nodded slightly and gently pressed his hand between Li Shaoxian's eyebrows. He said softly, It's good to know your mistakes and correct them. Mrs. Li, have a good rest. The zhenqi in his body slowly flowed into Li Shaoxian's body. Li Shaoxian only felt warm all over, and after a while, she fell asleep. Chris, who was standing to one side, had seen Li Jiandong pull her grandmother back from the embrace of death in the blink of an eye. Moreover, she looked radiant and much younger. But now, Li Jiandong only let Li Shaoxian fall asleep slowly, not like he had treated her grandmother. She couldn't help asking curiously, Master, why didn't you cure her? Chris had been with Li Jiandong and the others for a long time, and her Chinese had become more and more fluent. She was a blonde with blue eyes, and as soon as she opened her mouth, she spoke in standard Chinese, which naturally attracted the curious attention of Shen Wankai and the others. Li Jiandong looked at her with a smile and said, Chris. However, Chris suddenly interrupted Li Jiandong. She knelt down, raised her head, and said seriously, Master, I want to tell you that from today on, I will change my name to Lin Miao. Isn't this the Chinese name you gave me? Li Jiandong looked at Chris meaningfully and said, Then you have to understand that from now on, there will only be Lin Miao, and there will be no Chris. Chris said this to Li Jiandong at this time, obviously to tell him that she wanted to concentrate on cultivation with Li Jiandong and asked him to accept her as a disciple. Li Jiandong's words were full of subtext. It was obvious that he was telling Chris that if she wanted to be a disciple, she had to abandon everything and wholeheartedly adapt to her new identity. Lin Miao. Chris bowed down seriously and said, Yes, from now on, there will only be Lin Miao in this world, and there will be no Chris. Li Jiandong looked at her with a smile and said, Does your grandmother know? Chris raised her head and smiled sweetly. Of course she knows. She also wants to be a disciple of Master. Li Jiandong laughed, reached out his hand, and gently stroked her head. Well, from today on, you are Lin Miao. Chris, no, she should be called Lin Miao now. She was overjoyed when she heard this. She kowtowed 3 times and called him Master. After she finished bowing, Li Jiandong stood up and nodded slightly to Chen Wankai, who was looking at him eagerly, and said, Today, I will teach you your first lesson. She knew that Lin Miao was extremely talented, and her physical body furnace was also 1 in a million. She had the advantages of the West but not the disadvantages of the West, and the advantages of the East but not the disadvantages of the East. Needless to say, she had not only been transformed by the Dun Jindan, but also been able to become a disciple of the reincarnated Wisdom King. Such a person, what kind of achievements could she achieve in the future? She knew that Lin Miao was definitely not the first foreign female cultivator in the Chinese cultivation world. In the year 2000 before her, the Chuanjin Dragon sect had accepted a French blonde beauty as a disciple of the 32nd generation. Her Taoist name was Jing Xiao, and she was currently the president of the French Taoist Association. However, Jing Xiao did not have the opportunity and good fortune that Lin Miao had. Obviously, her future cultivation would not be as high as Lin Miao's. And this Lin Miao from the United States, would she surpass her? Would she surpass Wei Tsuanhua, the founder of the Shangqing sect, and Sun Bu'er, the founder of the Chuanjin Nanhua sect? What kind of changes would she bring to the cultivation world if she achieved such achievements in the future? The only thing she knew was that Li Jiandong had begun to show signs of, Jin Lin is not a fish in the pond, and when he meets the wind and clouds, he will change into a dragon. As soon as he moved, the wind and clouds around him will move, and as soon as the wind and clouds move, the world will move. An idea suddenly came to Zi Yuan's mind. She didn't know how far the man in front of her could go, but she wanted to stay by his side, quietly accompany him, and see how far he could go. However, what Zi Yuan didn't know was that a huge wave that would shake the entire cultivation world was about to sweep over. Alas. Illness comes from the mouth. Today I was greedy. I ate cold loofah and bananas, and my stomach rebelled again. What a tragedy, I'm writing in pain in addition. Wei Tsuanhua and Sun Bu'er were both famous female cultivators in China's history. Wang Chongyang's 7 disciples, Ma Yu, the eldest of the Chuanjin 7 masters, was married to Sun Bu'er. As for Jing Xiao, she was also a real person. This French girl was quite beautiful. She had entered the Taoist sect in Xi'an, and now she should have returned to China to spread Taoism. Those who were traveling in France could go to the French Taoist Association to see this beauty. Chapter 780. In the Shen family's villa, Li Yundong taught cultivation to his 2 disciples for the first time. He said with confidence, In your opinion, what is cultivation? This question stunned both Lin Miao and Chen Wankai. The 2 of them looked at each other. It was not the first time they had met. At this time, because of the opportunity, they had gathered together, so there was a sense of closeness in their hearts. Lin Miao thought for a moment and said, I think cultivation is a kind of hard cultivation, so as to constantly improve one's strength. However, Chen Wankai said, I think cultivating one's body and mind is cultivation. Li Yundong nodded and said, You're both right, but also wrong. In short, cultivation is to strengthen one's body and spirit through the method of cultivating one's body and mind. That is what the Taoists call dual cultivation of life and spirit. After strengthening one's body, one will have a power stronger than that of mortals. Just like when I saved your grandmother, Lin Miao. At that time, your grandmother's soul was scattered everywhere. I used the power of a powerful magical weapon to pull her soul back and poured a lot of Xueqi into your body. But your grandmother has been practicing martial arts all year round, and what she practices is the plum blossom fist, which is the closest to cultivation. Therefore, her body is strong and her furnace is vigorous. She is not inferior to cultivators at all. It's just that she doesn't understand the way of cultivation and can't get started. Therefore, if I inject Xueqi into her, she can completely bear it. Li Yundong pointed to Li Shaoxian, who was sleeping soundly, and said, but she is just an ordinary human furnace, and she has been hungry for so many days. Her body is already weak. If I suddenly pour a lot of pure Xueqi into her, her meridians will definitely explode and she will die. As he said this, Li Yundong smiled at Lin Miao and said, you have to remember that although there are many magic arts in the world, they are all the same. The way of the Great Way depends on your heart. You have to adapt to the local conditions, the person, and the time. Lin Miao thought for a while and nodded slowly. However, Chen Wankai couldn't help asking, Master, is Shaoxian okay now? Li Yundong smiled and said, she is just weak. She will be fine after a little recuperation. As long as she doesn't want to die, of course, there will be no problem. Chen Wankai was relieved. He glanced at Li Shaoxian and asked, Master, isn't it a little late for me to cultivate at such an old age? Li Yundong thought for a while and looked at Shen Hui and the third concubine. He hesitated for a moment. The third concubine was very clever. She immediately pulled Shen Hui and said with a smile, you guys talk first. Huier and I will prepare some food. As she said this, she pulled Shen Hui out of the room. After coming out, the third concubine looked back. Although she was angry at Shen Hui for asking Li Yundong to save Li Shaoxian, she felt even more regretful that Shen Hui could not stay in the room at this time. She naturally knew that since her father had taken Li Yundong as his master, he would definitely be greatly influenced by him in the future. If her daughter could get close to Li Yundong, there would naturally be many benefits in the future. Thinking of this, the third concubine couldn't help complaining about Shen Hui. You stupid girl. I asked you to acknowledge me as your master in the past, but you didn't. Now, even if you want to acknowledge me as your master, I won't accept you. I'm so angry that I was kicked out of my own house. Shen Hui also looked gloomy. She looked at the room with a complicated look in her eyes. She opened her mouth and wanted to refute, but she couldn't say anything. She was silent for a while, feeling lost in her heart. At this time in the room, Li Yundong said to Shen Wankai, it's indeed a little late for you to cultivate now, but in history, there are people who have cultivated at an old age. For example, Zhang Sanfeng, Wang Chongyang, and Ma Yu. These people are all old. Shen Wankai smiled bitterly and said, Master, I don't expect to cultivate to their level. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, according to the Yellow Emperor's canon of internal medicine, the liver is weak at 7 or 8, and the tendons can't move. After 8 or 8 days, the man is thirsty, the essence is little, the kidney is weak, and the body is extremely weak. The 7 or 8 and 8 refer to the two age gaps of 56 and 64 years old. At this stage, men have entered the stage of decline and are very unsuitable for cultivation. Shen Wankai was disappointed. Then, is there any other way? Li Yundong smiled and said, yes. Shen Wankai's eyes suddenly lit up. What is it? Li Yundong smiled and said, take pills and medicine to cultivate your body and mind. Even though Shen Wankai had seen a lot of the world, he couldn't help but be excited when he heard such a thing at this time. Like a teenager, he said with a face full of desire, what pills? What medicine? Is it the elixir of life? Master, do you know how to refine it? Li Yundong shook his head and said with a smile, I don't know, and I can't refine it. Shen Wankai was shocked, and his face was full of disappointment. Even you can't refine it? Li Yundong nodded slightly. Yes, but you can. Shen Wankai was stunned and then said with a wry smile, Master, don't joke. Li Yundong laughed and said, have you forgotten that you have the Medicine King tripod? Shen Wankai was stunned for a moment, and then he suddenly came to his senses. He rushed out like a gust of wind and rushed back like a gust of wind. He held the Medicine King tripod with both hands and respectfully held it over his head. He bent down and handed it to Li Yundong. "Master, the Medicine King tripod is here. I will give it to you now as a fee for my entry." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Are you kidding me? 700 million yuan for the entry fee? Do you want to scare me to death?" As he said this, he said to Lin Miao, "Lin Miao, can you afford such an entry fee?" Lin Miao smiled bitterly and said, "Master, don't play with me." Chen Wankai looked a little embarrassed as he said, "Master, I was wrong, but this is a token of my sincerity. In my hands, it's just an antique collection. In your hands, it's a great magic treasure of immortals. If you let me hold it all the time, it's also a sin. As the saying goes, an ordinary man is innocent, but he gets into trouble because of his wealth. Master, you don't want to see me suffer a misfortune, do you?" Shen Wansai's words were quite good. Li Yundong smiled. He was not pretentious. He nodded and said, "Okay, then I'll keep it for you for the time being. In the future, when I refine the pills, I'll give them to you." Seeing that Li Yundong had accepted the Medicine King tripod, Shen Wankai was relieved. Seeing that Li Yundong had finally taken the Medicine King tripod, Zi Yuan was secretly happy for him. Now that the Medicine King tripod was in hand, as long as there were medicinal materials, with the alchemy skill she had learned, she and Li Yundong would not be afraid of having no pills to use in the near future. Even if one day they really had no money, they could also wholesale elixirs. This could also be a way to make money. Li Yundong didn't know what Zi Yuan was thinking. He seriously taught Lin Miao and Shen Wankai the most basic cultivation knowledge, just like Zi Yuan had taught him. In the past few days, he had been going back and forth between the Shen family and his own home, teaching Lin Miao and Shen Wankai while helping Li Shaoxian take care of her body. Unknowingly, it was already close to the end of the year. A southern city like Tiannan City finally had a little chill. In the distant Mount Longhu in Jiangxi province, the approach of the Spring Festival made this place, which was full of outstanding people, feel like spring had arrived. Mount Longhu was surrounded by mountains and rivers, and there was plenty of water vapor. In recent years, the temperature had been generally high. Although it was close to the end of the year, it had strangely rained near Mount Longhu these days. On the side peak of Mount Longhu, raindrops fell in a pitter-patter. A tall and lush green pine tree was like a huge canopy, blocking the wind-dust stone. In front of this huge stone stood a graceful woman. This woman was wearing a red Han dress, and her long skirt was flowing. She looked like a fairy in a painting. She stood in the rain, letting the rain fall on her hair, and then slowly converge into water droplets. They flowed over the vermilion beauty mole between her eyebrows, then across her cheeks, and finally soaked into her clothes, making her whole body wet. This woman was none other than Ao Wushuang. She didn't know how long she had been standing there, but she was like a stone statue, motionless. She just stared at the huge wind-dust stone. She had been standing like this, trembling slightly under the invasion of the cold rain and humidity. At some point, a low sigh finally came from behind Ao Wushuang. "Are you going to stand like this forever? Why are you hiding from someone who comes to see you?" Hearing this voice, Ao Wushuang's body trembled. She slowly turned around and looked at the man in front of her, who she had been thinking about day and night. "Wang Yuanshan, are you finally willing to come out and see me?" Ao Wushuang's voice was a little hoarse as she whispered. Wang Yuanshan sighed heavily. "If I don't come out, you'll be finished. Don't you know that there is a magic circle here? Not only does it imprison my feet so that I can't leave Mount Longhu for the rest of my life, but it will also slowly weaken the magic power and zhenqi of demons like you. Have you felt cold these days? Have you felt that your magic power is draining very quickly?" Ao Wushuang couldn't help but say excitedly, "I don't think so, and I don't care about these things. I only care about why you are so heartless to me. Tell me, why are you like this? If you don't explain it clearly today, I will die in front of you." A hint of pain finally flashed through Wang Yuanshan's eyes. He shook his head sadly and said, "I thought that after 10 years, your feelings would gradually fade, and you would eventually forget me. But I didn't expect." Tears welled up in Ao Wushuang's eyes. She couldn't tell which were tears and which were rain. She cried, "How can I forget you? You stole my heart away 10 years ago. My heart has always been with you. How can I ever forget it? Tell me, tell me. Wang Yuanshan looked extremely pained. He lowered his head and said in a low voice after a long time, "Then I'll give it back to you now, okay?" Ao Wushuang hissed, "It's too late, it's too late." Wang Yuanshan raised his head, his eyes full of tears. He said, "Silly girl. Why are you so silly?" Seeing him like this, Ao Wushuang couldn't help but feel moved. She was surprised and happy, but also afraid. She tentatively said, "You still love me, don't you? You said that before, so you must have suffered a lot, right?" The more Ao Wushuang spoke, the more excited she became. She couldn't help but walk quickly to Wang Yuanshan, grab his arm and shake it hard. "Tell me you still love me, don't you?" Wang Yuanshan raised his head, as if he was unwilling to let his tears roll down. He said bitterly, "If I say no, will you believe me?" Ao Wushuang shook her head quickly. "I don't believe it, I don't believe it. You must still love me. I knew it." At this time, Ao Wushuang felt as if her heart was about to explode. She was so happy that she hugged Wang Yuanshan and murmured, "I knew you still loved me." Wang Yuanshan raised his hand and wanted to stroke Ao Wushuang's hair, but his hand froze in mid-air. In the end, it fell on her shoulder and slowly pushed her away. Wang Yuanshan said bitterly, "Wushuang, you shouldn't have come. Don't you know that the magic formation under my feet will constantly drain your spiritual power?" Ao Wushuang's face was full of tears, but her eyes were full of joy. She shook her head and said firmly, "I'm not afraid. As long as I can be with you, I'm not afraid of anything." Wang Yuanshan raised his head in pain. "But I'm afraid." Ao Wushuang couldn't help but shout, "What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of?" Wang Yuanshan looked at Ao Wushuang deeply and said slowly, "The magic formation under your feet is called the Absolute Love Extinguishing Array. At first, your spiritual power will slowly drain, but slowly, your cultivation will continue to regress. From 7 tails to 6 tails, from 6 tails to 5 tails, and in the end, you will become an ordinary fox with only 1 tail. At that time, you will no longer have spirituality or demon power. Even, all your previous memories will disappear, and you will become an ordinary fox." Wang Yuanshan stroked Ao Wushuang's cheek lovingly and said in a trembling voice, "Do you want to become like this?" His words made Ao Wushuang feel as if a bolt of heavenly thunder had fallen from the top of her head. Her beautiful face turned pale and pale. How could this be? Why was this happening? If she became an ordinary fox and didn't remember Wang Yuanshan, then, what was the difference between her and being dead? But if she couldn't be with Wang Yuanshan, what was the point of living? What should she do? What should she do? Chapter 781. Wang Yuanshan's words made Ao Wushuang feel as if she had fallen into an ice cave. She trembled in fear and said incredulously, "Why is this happening? Why did they use such a vicious magic formation to deal with you?" Wang Yuanshan gently stroked Ao Wushuang's cheek and said softly, "They are not dealing with me. They are dealing with you, Wushuang." 2 lines of clear tears flowed down from Ao Wushuang's eyes. She choked and said, "Is it because I'm a fox demon and you're the leader of the Lingong sect? Can't they tolerate us just like that?" Wang Yuanshan sighed heavily and said, "Wushuang, now do you know why I've been hiding from you? Now do you know why I want to sever the past with you? Forget me and start your own life again. The agreement I made with them was that as long as you were not with me, they would not make things difficult for you." Ao Wushuang suddenly thought of something. She grabbed Wang Yuanshan and said anxiously and earnestly, "Yuanshan, you have broken through to the Thunder Retribution realm, haven't you? This magic formation shouldn't be able to stop you, should it? Come with me. We'll hide far away. The world is so big, and there must be a place for us to hide." Wang Yuanshan shook his head bitterly and said, "Don't be silly. As long as I leave the range of Mount Longhu, I will immediately attract the heavenly thunder. Within a radius of 10 miles, it will be struck by the 9 heaven divine night thunder. Not to mention you, even I will be struck into powder." Ao Wushuang's lips trembled slightly. She looked at Wang Yuanshan in despair and said bitterly, Is there any other way?" Wang Yuanshan sighed softly and said, "No, don't think about it anymore. Let's get out of here. If you stay any longer, You will degenerate into a six-tailed spiritual fox. Ao Wushuang hugged Wang Yuanshan tightly and refused to let go. She cried and said, I don't care. Even if I become an ordinary fox again, I will stay by your side. Wang Yuanshan just shook his head and said, Don't be silly. Don't you see that it's starting to rain heavily? It's almost spring, and it's time to go through the thunder retribution. At this time, the mystical silver fox will definitely follow her through the thunder retribution. Once she finishes, it will be time for her to wake up completely and recover her strength. At that time, the fierce battle more than 1,000 years ago will be repeated, and the Fox Zen School will definitely become the target of public criticism again. At that time, Ao Wushuang, you'd better run as far as you can. Ao Wushuang was shocked. What? The mystical silver fox? Now the leader of the Fox Zen School is Li Yundong. He has already governed the Fox Zen School very well. Why should the Fox Zen School become the target of public criticism? Ao Wushuang's mind was in a mess. She said in as she as Li said, Jiu jiaz as she as she as she as she as he as she as. Ao Wushuang's mind was in a mess. She said in shock, No, I have to tell Li Yundong. Wang as she he said no. You with Wu. As Chan shi chan as he Wang. She as he with as you as the Li yi as Li as Chan in with the Chen. This will involve Chaner. Li Yundong can stop all of this. Wang Yuanshan couldn't help but say angrily, No, you must leave. The further the better. Take Su Chan with you. Ao Wushuang asked in surprise, why? Wang Yuanshan stared at Ao Wushuang closely. After a long time he said slowly, Once the mystical silver fox finishes the thunder tribulation, she will recover all her strength. There are very few people in the world who can stop her. The cultivators of the major sects can't deal with the mystical silver fox. But can't they deal with you? When the time comes, all the major sects will join forces to eliminate the henchmen of the Fox Zen School first. It is even possible that the cultivation world of China will join forces. You and Su Chan are the two strongest fox spirits in the Fox Zen School now. If they don't attack you, who else will they attack? No matter how strong Li Yundong was, could he stop the cultivators of two countries by himself? Think about it. Since ancient times, which cultivator could withstand the joint attack of all the cultivators in the world? No, absolutely not. As he spoke, Wang Yuanshan said, Li Yundong is the reincarnated Wisdom King and the mystical silver fox is his mortal enemy. He can indeed deal with the mystical silver fox, but he is still too weak now. He is definitely no match for the mystical silver fox. If you stay by his side, you will only drag him down and cause the cultivation sects in the world to deal with him instead. Ao Wushuang looked at Wang Yuanshan in a daze, and her lips trembled slightly. She said softly, What you said. I understand, but what about you? Are you going to stay in Mount Longhu for the rest of your life and never go down the mountain again? Am I going to be separated from you for the rest of my life? Wang Yuanshan smiled sadly and said, Wushuang, accept your fate. Humans and demons can't be together. You. Hurry up and go as far as possible. It's best if you never come back. Ao Wushuang said anxiously, But what if the mystical silver fox wins in the end? What will you do? Can you get out of here? Wang Yuanshan smiled and said lightly, She can't win. Zhang Tianshi and Master Purin had sensed that chaos was coming more than 10 years ago, and they had already made preparations. Go away and don't come back again. If you stay any longer, you will really forget everything. As he spoke, he pushed Ao Wushuang hard in his arms and sent her flying. Ao Wushuang stopped in mid-air. She looked at Wang Yuanshan with tears in her eyes. After a long time, she reluctantly turned her head and left. Wang Yuanshan watched Ao Wushuang leave in a daze. He didn't move at all, like a stone statue. After a long time, he sighed softly, turned around, and walked into the woods. At the foot of the hillside not far away, Zhang Lufang was holding a bamboo umbrella. She turned her head sadly and sighed at her master, Zhang Kongyun, who was beside her. Master, it's so cruel. Why can't they be together? Zhang Kongyun said with a cold face. It's an iron law that humans and demons can't coexist. Although the times have changed, how can humans and demons be together? Zhang Lufang sighed and said, But Ao Wushuang is so pitiful. Zhang Kongyun snorted coldly and said, What is love in the world? This fox spirit is very emotional. It's a pity that she was reincarnated in the wrong body. Zhang Lufeng shook her head and said, "Why can't lovers get married?" Zhang Kongyun smiled coldly and didn't say anything. After a while he said, "Don't worry about them. Worry about yourself first. Chaos is coming. With your half-baked skills, humph humph." Zhang Liufeng's eyes lit up and she suddenly asked, "By the way, master, how powerful is the mystical silver fox? What if we can't beat her? What is the preparation that Wang Yuanshan mentioned?" Zhang Kongyun looked at the place where Wang Yuanshan's figure had disappeared with a complicated look in his eyes. He sighed heavily and said, "Don't ask. You don't want to know." Zhang Lufeng looked at him in confusion. "What? Why do you say that?" Zhang Kongyun's eyes flashed with a touch of irritation and melancholy. He shouted in a low voice, "Don't ask. If you've seen enough, let's go. I really don't know why you're so gossipy all day long. You don't even cultivate properly." Zhang Lufeng pouted and muttered in a low voice, "You're so annoying. The cultivation world is about to be finished. What's the point of cultivating?" Zhang Kongyun said angrily, "Bastard, what are you talking about? How could the cultivation world be finished?" Zhang Lufeng giggled and said, "Master, tell me, what are you preparing for?" Zhang Kongyun snorted angrily and said, "Stop dreaming. I won't tell you." Zhang Lufeng surrounded Zhang Kongyun and said, "Oh master, don't be like this. Tell me quickly. My mouth is sealed. Tell me quickly." Just as the two of them were entangled and going down the mountain, Ao Wushuang was walking on the mountain road in a daze. This time, she finally knew Wang Yuanshan's sincerity, but she felt even more pain. God seemed to be deliberately torturing her, making it impossible for her to be with Wang Yuanshan. She walked slowly along the way. She didn't know how long she had walked until she found herself in an unknown wilderness. Her surroundings were filled with mud, and in front of her stood a man with a foreign bloodline. The man stood in the rain with his hands behind his back. The raindrops around him were falling, but they were all bounced off without exception, as if there was an invisible chi shield around him. When Ao Wushuang saw the man at a glance, her originally lifeless eyes finally moved. She moved her gaze stiffly and looked at him. Then, she continued to move like a walking corpse, trying to leave him. This man was Wan Jinyuan. When Ao Wushuang was about to pass by him, he suddenly said, "He wants to see you." Ao Wushuang's body froze. Her voice was hoarse as she said in a low voice, "Him? You mean Lu Yi?" Wan Jinyuan was obviously in a good mood. He smiled slightly, and his smile was full of complacency. "Yes, he wants to see you." Ao Wushuang moved her eyeballs and looked at him coldly and indifferently. "Why does he want to see me?" Wan Jinyuan curled his lips and said, "Then you should ask him face to face. Maybe you just want to catch up. Maybe he has a way to help you solve your current problem." These words immediately made Ao Wushuang feel as if she had come back to life. She became excited and her eyes widened. "He has a way. Does he really have a way?" Wan Jinyuan chuckled and made a gesture. "You have to verify it yourself." Ao Wushuang gritted her teeth and instantly turned into a beam of blue light, flying toward Dongwu City like lightning. Wan Jinyuan looked in the direction in which her figure had quickly disappeared, shook his head, and said with a smile, "What an impatient person." As he said this, he also flew over. By the time Ao Wushuang arrived in Dongwu City, it was already night. She went straight to Lu Ye's residence and pushed the door open with a bang. She saw Lu Yi sitting under the eaves, quietly watching a game of chess. It was as if he was playing chess and playing with the lights. Ao Wushuang didn't even look at Mei Nyang, who was next to her. She walked straight to Lu Yi and said, "Do you have a way to save Wang Yuanshan?" Lu Yi didn't look up. He just glanced at Mei Nyang, who was next to him. Mei Nyang understood. After kissing him on the forehead, she got up and left gracefully. Lu Yi pointed to an empty stool that had been prepared in front of him and said, "Sit down." Ao Wushuang glanced at it, but she didn't sit down. She was anxious and nervous. She asked with anticipation and fear, "Do you have a way to save Wang Yuanshan? How do you know that I will go to see him?" Lu Yi laughed and shook his head. "I brought you up when you were a child. How can I not know what you are thinking and what you will do?" As for saving Wang Yuanshan, hate. I don't have the ability to go to the hinterland of Mount Longhu to save him. Ao Wushuang smiled in despair. Her smile was sad. I knew it. She turned around and wanted to leave. But at this time, Lu Yi suddenly said, although I can't do it, someone can. Ao Wushuang turned around like a gust of wind and asked, who? You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.